Everyone, welcome. Welcome to the audience online. Welcome to the audience in the room to our event organized by CCIE Europe together with Euractiv as media partner to talk about the Digital Networks Act and the future of European connectivity. Before we dive into conversations, we're going to have a few opening remarks by Maria Teresa Stecker from CCIE Europe, who's policy manager on connectivity. Maria Teresa.
Morning, everyone. Thank you very much for being here, to those connecting online. As Claudie said, my name, for those of you who don't know me, is Maria Teresa, working on competition connectivity at CCIE Europe. So this morning I will just walk you through some introductory remarks and housekeeping details. But before that, let me thank Euractiv for co-organizing this event, and of course to all the panelists that accepted to speak and that ultimately made this event possible. So in terms of housekeeping, do note the event is not Chatham House. It's being live streamed and recorded, and there will be a recording on Euractiv's YouTube channel. And we're going to take questions through Slido after each panel, so do please follow Claudie and Tefan's instructions for that. Moving on to today's discussion. So we are just about 2 months before the publication of the so expected Digital Networks Act. And today the goal is to address, let's say, 3 key issues that are fundamental in this discussion. So the first is the premise of this discussion, which we're going to address in the first panel. Do we see a cloud telco continuum? Is there a level? Is there a playing field to be leveled? The second panel will dive a bit deeper into one of the key themes of discussion of the Digital Networks Act. What is a dispute resolution mechanism? How does that play into a network fee? And how does the Italian Telecom decision play into all of this? And in the third panel, panelists will have the challenge of looking ahead. Will AI have a great impact on the networks? Will traffic grow exponentially? How are consumers fitting into this discussion? And if we were going to have a DNA, how do we make a DNA that works for all of the European consumers? I know that this is quite a lot to unpack and to discuss, but the underlying question and the doubt that we have is, what's the actual problem that we're solving here? Because in a context of regulatory simplification as a priority, then what is the problem that here the market cannot solve by itself? Because the goal of regulation is to solve issues that a market cannot solve again. So I think this is the underlying question, and what ideally we would like to respond to after this discussion. I know it's quite an ambition, but we like to be ambitious. So I do hope that the discussion will be interesting. And I now leave you to the first panel and Claudie and the first panelists. Thank you very much.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. I should have introduced myself, actually, starting off. My name is Claudie Moreau. I'm a tech reporter at Euractiv. And today we'll be discussing exactly what Maria Teresa said in this first panel. Mostly, is there a convergence between different services in telecom and tech sectors? The Commission white paper on the future of European digital infrastructure talks about this. And then it was part also of the call for the Digital Networks Act, the DNA. Call for evidence. So we'll be diving a bit into this. And based on that, should there be further rules extending to different sectors, for instance, cloud and content delivery networks? So for this, I have a great team of panelists here with me. Petra Arts first, who is Director of Public Policy at Cloudflare. David Abecassis, who is managing partner at Analysis Mason, Darren Ennis, a director of EU Affairs at Vodafone, and Gabriele Favaro, who is a tech and sustainability policy manager at ITI. Welcome, thanks for being here. For the audience, we'll take a few questions at the end of the panel. For this, we use Slido. For the people in the room, there are some QR codes around that you can scan and ask your questions, and then I'll be receiving them here. And for the audience, you'll have them, the QR code on your screen. All right, so without further ado, let's dive into the topic. Can I start with you, David? So the Commission speaks of a convergence between services. We're seeing telecom operators moving a lot of their services to cloud. We're also seeing investments in edge computing, for instance. So this is quite a million-dollar question. Is there a convergence? Is this a real convergence? What are we seeing in practice?
Thank you, Claudie. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here on this panel. So this is a question that we've looked at in some details over the last 18 months or so. I think a lot of the thinking in this area, at least for us, was stimulated by two different trends and two different triggers. One is generally this question around the role of cloud in telecoms, right? And can telecoms as an industry avail itself to the benefits of cloud? That's something that we've been working on for many years. It's a question that is present in every industry, not just in telecoms. And I'll get back to your question around sort of telecoms operators moving things to cloud. But the second trigger was the consultation that the Commission put out, I think, in February 2024, which posited a mature level of convergence between cloud and telecoms. And I think if we take the first part, what's going on at the intersection between cloud and telecoms, there's two things that we see. So we do see an increased use of cloud services by telecoms operators, and I'm sure Darren can talk about what Vodafone is doing in this area. But that's very similar in scope to what happens in other parts of the economy. So it's moving CRM systems, it's moving internal IT. It's not yet affecting core communication infrastructure and the network. So there's, I don't have very up-to-date numbers, but when we looked at it about a year ago, significantly less than 1% of network functions were in a form of public cloud. So obviously there's private cloud, there's types of IT infrastructure that operators are putting in place that is cloud-like, but that's not public cloud in nature. And I think that distinction is very important when we talk about, or when we think about this idea of convergence. It may happen in the future, but it's not there. And at the point where it's mature, it can happen technically, which is probably not quite the case yet. Then, of course, the rules that apply to telecoms operators in terms of managing their network will translate into requirements for cloud providers who want to supply services to operators. So that's the first point. And the second point around the degree of convergence that could affect the discussion we have today, which is European legislation and the regulation that flows from it. I think this is not something that we see. So we see a large degree of complementarity, and we've written about this in some details. Cloud services are online services. They rely on networked infrastructure, right? So there's a bunch of data centers, there's a bunch of points of interconnection that are connected with networks, and they also stimulate demand for some connectivity services. I think it'll be useful to hear your experience on that as well. But we have some research that shows that certainly for B2B telecom services, there's a good degree of complementarity, and there are partnerships between operators and cloud providers to sell a combination of cloud on-RAM connectivity and sometimes services around cloud. But it's not convergence. There's no substitutability between cloud services and telecom services. And we can discuss, there's some nuances around the edges, but that's the assessment that sadly we have at this point. I'll stop there.
Okay. Oh, good, thank you. Petra, turning to you, I think one type of service which is often seen as and an in-between zone is content delivery networks, CDNs. Can you tell us more about this? If they're so similar to telecom services, shouldn't they be regulated as if they were?
Thanks, and thanks for first of all for having me on the panel. Yes, so one of the services that Cloudflare provides is a content delivery network service. I think, very much agree with some of the analysis that David has just made, and I think to a large extent it also applies to CDNs versus telecom networks. I think there is definitely complementarity more than a substitutability. I think I like that word, David. In the function of a CDN. So what a CDN does is to help speed up the delivery of content to end users, but we are not a B2C operator ourselves, right? Our customers are businesses, website owners, content providers, small businesses, anybody who wants to reach end users over the internet. And what we do is to try to help the delivery of that content by caching the content in various points of presence and distributed data centers around the world. To me, that is a complementary function to, in one hand, also cooperate with ISPs to try to help deliver that content in a faster way for end users. But we are not the one who has a direct interaction with the end users. We are not the one who delivers the connectivity to the end user. So there is a certain difference between the functions in the ecosystem. We're all part of that ecosystem, and we have, they're all networks that are connected with each other. But we do see a very distinct difference between the function of a CDN versus the function of an operator that delivers the connectivity to the end user. So for us, there is definitely a cooperation and a necessary kind of interaction between all those different players. But that doesn't mean that they then have to be or should be regulated in the same way. In that to the question of regulation. So there is definitely an interesting discussion, I think, on the convergence point. I do agree with David that we also do not see that happening, also not on the CDN side, that there is a complete, that there is a complete sameness in all of the services. They're all necessary to deliver the content. Like everybody has their role to play, but there is a definite difference.
All right, thank you. Darren, if I can get a bit of your view on this. So we hear that there is not necessarily that much of a convergence, maybe more of a complementarity. Could I get your view on this? And what kind of services do you think are similar to your service as a telecom provider?
Well, first of all, thanks for having you. Secondly, I'm not the cloud expert. Otherwise, I would have sent someone else along who's a lot more au fait with that on an in-depth version. But I think what I picked up is 2 points from the previous speakers, which are really important. One is not yet. So we're still in, I keep coming back to that Rumsfeld, we've got so many unknown unknowns, known unknowns, and known knowns. And I think that's really, really important because what we're saying is that, and I think what we are all agreeing is that whatever the DNA is, and isn't what we want it to be, is to be future-proofed, right? That we don't have to keep coming back to reopening the rule book. The second thing is cooperation, right? It's clear that everybody that is involved is an ecosystem, and what we're saying as a sector is we're probably talking about the definition of the ecosystem. When the code was originally developed in 2016, it was a completely different world, right? We also took 2 years for it to be essentially adopted. Then, obviously, I think Poland, correct me if I'm wrong, was I think in 2024 the last country to adopt the code. So we're always trying to play catch up, and then you throw into the mix COVID, where we saw 1,000% increase in traffic. We saw essentially what experts say was a decade of technological transformation in the space of 2 years, and you throw all that into the mix. I think what we're all saying is that we need, whatever the DNA is, it needs to be future-proofed. And what we're saying is that we want to see a DNA that is fair and has a level playing field. And when we talk about level playing field, is one that encapsulates the whole of the ecosystem, whether you're operators, whether you're people who are running CDNs, or whether it is the end services. Because at the end of the day, and again, I think we would all agree on this, the most important thing is that we have networks, whatever they are, whether they are traditional cloud or whatever in virtualized or whatever in the future, that they are fit for purpose and that they deliver the services that European citizens, SMEs and businesses want. And as infrastructure providers, that's what we want. And we all have to have the ability to scale to deliver those services. So I think that's where I think we should be more, rather than talking more about fragmentation, can we talk about more around how we can have more cooperation? I think that's our sort of starting position.
Thank you. Gabriele, I'm curious if you can tell us a bit more about this cooperation. I mean, the telecom and tech industries are cooperating all the time on many different aspects. Latest in date is a lot of projects that were submitted to the Commission for the AI Gigafactories, for instance. Obviously, these sectors work together, they depend on each other. So given this, shouldn't there be a level of complementarity in how they're also regulated?
Well, first of all, thanks for the invite, and the scene has been already kind of framed, so there are very interesting elements to comment on. So maybe from our perspective, as representing the whole tech sector, so including CAPs, CDNs, cloud providers, and telecom vendors, even, it's interesting, and I share already the perspectives mentioned before around basically the fact that we kind of agree on the complementarity, as you said, right? And this is, the kind of framework we want to underline, the assumption we want to underline. For us, it's a matter more of complementarity and how to boost and improve and make innovation more possible through complementarity, rather than talking about any kind of, convergence reflected in the regulatory framework. So Darren was commenting about, again, the having an ecosystem definition in order to thrive there. But I would argue that to a certain extent, an ecosystem needs the same identical regulation, right? You have differences in there as well. You could work through markets, through commercial agreement, and this, until it's functional, it can be a way, right? Let me give you like a simple example there that it came to my mind yesterday and I was reflecting upon. If we consider, for instance, airports and airlines, airports operate infrastructure, gates, runways, while you have airlines where you have, passengers, you have destinations, you have airplanes. So they actually are even more, complementary to a certain extent, but they are subject to a different set of legislation there. And of course, with due differences here. But this is just to, reflect upon the fact that when it comes to defining a whole ecosystem, same regulation, same regulatory framework is not necessarily a given to a certain extent. So to go to the complementary aspect, we think that in the same way, when we consider operators and CAPs, CDNs, cloud providers. From the one end, you have the last mile access to the infrastructure. From the other end, you have services on top of it that could become more or less complementary depending on which service we're talking about. But at the same time, they're based on complementarity and provision of services, right? So we have several examples of cooperation that has been improving over the past years, and as it was mentioning, during crisis, it even improved this cooperation. When we talk about deployment of edge, infrastructure, caches, but even on traffic optimization, we'll have, I think, the chance to discuss more about this. But we have advanced video compression, decompression, agreements around that. We have different examples of how to improve traffic optimization and try to, even through this collaboration, favor how traffic can be managed by operators. So I'm sure, and on CDNs, Petra will give us more details of these examples of collaboration. But this is all to say that when we talk about complementarity and convergence, they are two different things, not only from a mere definition perspective, but it's more foundational in terms of what we actually consider within the ecosystem.
Mm-hmm. Darren, if I can get back to you also, sorry, on this, but also, I mean, a lot of the talks are about simplification, and I think everybody in the industry and everybody at the Commission, it seems, also agrees that there should be a degree of simplification. Shouldn't that apply across the whole ecosystem you're talking about, regardless of how they're regulated currently?
Absolutely. I think it's about modernization and simplification. That's our sort of starting position. And I think our view is that I think we like to frame the debate around a responsible use of networks, that we all have a responsibility. And I think ideally, from our perspective, we wish we weren't in the position that we were seeking to have regulation as the answer, because actually we recently released a report on what we believe is the responsible use of networks, and in there, for example, we look at an industry code of conduct, for example, and some of this was learnings from COVID, right, where we had to invoke some of these technological solutions, but the word was invoke. It would have been, I think it would have been nice if we had all, I think, come together post-COVID and actually did a bit of lessons learned as a collective industry, and how can we look at some of those technological solutions. I think that's number one. I think secondly, from an infrastructure perspective, as an industry, our return on capital employed, the economics just don't stack up for us, and we're looking for, I think we all agree, we need a level of efficiencies, and we need a level of new opportunities to scale. On efficiencies, we're talking about, for example, I think, and I'm very, colleagues from the other parts of the ecosystem, support us on things like reform of spectrum. We believe we need a harmonization of spectrum policy, taking out the auctions that are very extractive in terms of money, and reinvesting that into infrastructure that can serve the whole of the ecosystem. There's a very simple example of an efficiency. We also would like to see, obviously, I think we would all also, from what I believe, agree that we want to see reform of the competition rule book, that is modernized, right? And that we can all scale again to be able to deliver the services that we want. And then we do come back to the level playing field, and it isn't just about what we discussed now, but we're seeking, for example, a modernization of the open internet regulation and the net neutrality legislation, in line with, for example, what we've seen in the UK, where again, one example is, we talk about end user, defining that end user. We clearly, open internet was developed to protect consumer, but again, to be frank, it's out of date. For example, B2B services, should they be captured within the open internet regulation, or should they be exempt, in which then that I think would also benefit all of us to be able to grow those B2B services and not impact the citizen or consumer or SME. So I think from our perspective, and then on simplification, we look at satellites, right? Why do we have to deal with 27 different authorities? We have something like 270, I think, regulators amongst us all. So I think there's probably a lot more that we agree on than actually we disagree on. And I've been around the town a long time. I have been a journalist even myself. And I think what we have to really avoid now as we go to the DNA, I think as an ecosystem, I think our message from the telecom sector is that I think let's try and push more on what we all agree on. I think we agree on the destination, we agree on the ambition, and let's not fall into the trap that I think we all did for the last 2.5 years since Commissioner Breton, which is, to be frank, spending more time on the things that divide us and then miss these other opportunities when it comes to creating efficiencies for scale and creating new opportunities. And I think that's our sort of our position, certainly at Vodafone.
Yeah. David, can I get a reaction on this? Also on the issue of fragmentation. I mean, there's different regulators on different parts of the telecom ecosystem as well. So how does this kind of impair the efficiency of this sector?
So there's a lot to unpack in what Darren said. I think there's and I was kind of thinking about how do we take a little bit of distance to sort of organize our thoughts, right? And I think if you look at the way in which telecoms regulation work, but I think that's true for actually other types of regulations as well. There's an aspect which is around competition, promoting, developing competition as a means to discipline markets and to achieve positive outcomes. Then there's a consumer protection angle, and I think I take your point around the open internet order and the kind of distinction to be made between B2B services and B2C services. I think one of the complexities around that, and I think there's a panel separately on that, but one of the complexities is more if you start having sort of more creative use of network for B2B services, does it have an impact on B2C services? I think that's the thing that's a little bit harder to...
Or B2B2C.
B2B2C, that's right. But I think fundamentally the UK example is an interesting one, and I think Ofcom took the view early on that it didn't need to be too interventionist on open internet because it had a set of competitive markets upstream from it. And I think that I think there's a little bit of a maximalist position in asking for a reform of the competition law to allow more consolidation in markets, and then saying actually, we also want less downstream regulation on consumer services in particular. And I think that's also an area where you talk about fragmentation. So there's a few different things that I think are worth mentioning. One is some of these markets are maybe 75% B2C, give or take, right? So if you think about telecom services, it's roughly or 2/3, 1/3, I think, in Europe at the moment. If you look at CDN, it's 100% B2B. And in fact, we can also talk about how CDNs are more sort of technical intermediaries, and where the substitutes on the demand side are more doing things yourself as opposed to buying a service from Vodafone, right? I mean, Vodafone could enter the CDN market, in which case it would be, I would say, on the level playing field with Cloudflare. So when we talk about level playing field, there's also this question about what, I think somebody said, what sports are we playing? I don't think that will get us very far, but I think in terms of the ecosystem, as Gabriele said, it's managing the interactions between different parts of the ecosystem is different from applying the same rules across the ecosystem. And I think you don't seem to disagree with this, Darren, which I think is good. The second point around fragmentation is more a product of history. So telecoms regulation evolved from national markets, even very often, I'm old enough to remember the post office managing telecoms services as an administration. And it's evolved a lot, right? So the question I think for us today and that the Commission's been grappling with for the last 2 years is what comes next? And given the progress that we've made towards competition, you mentioned that Vodafone sees itself as an infrastructure provider. I think that's a really important part of how we think about competition in the future. The fact that there is an increasing layering or delayering, I guess, between infrastructure and services. So what opportunities does that give us to be maybe to deregulate the service part if the infrastructure services are available on a competitive basis in the right way? So sometimes that's a fragmentation of the value chain that's actually quite interesting and positive, right? When we talk about fragmentation of regulation, I think going back to what I was saying, the telecoms regulatory framework stems from markets that were very national in nature. The Commission's done a lot of work to try and harmonize certain things, right? Certainly in terms of practice. The Gigabit Infrastructure Act is trying to codify things a little bit more proactively across the board. I see it as trying to distribute best practice across Europe as opposed to necessarily imposing top-down regulation, right? But it is an interesting change. But I think that's also an opportunity to kind of reflect on some fundamental difference between telecoms as a sector, which has existed for a very long time, and some of the new parts of what you call the ecosystem, right? Which have evolved in global markets with global economies of scale, global players, and of course we can have a discussion about how we should regulate global players that have giant scale, globally. But that's in a way a different discussion. It's not a DNA discussion. It's maybe a DMA or DSA discussion. And so I think the risk here is to try to not manage to. So I think it'd be interesting to hear if some representative of the Commission want to say some words about this. But I think at European level, and I certainly as a European would like to see a more European market for telecoms. I think it's been difficult for a combination of reasons. I think infrastructure responds to economies of scale that tend to be more localized, right? So it's more about the density of demand that you can get in a given place. That's what drives your economies of scale, rather than being able to expand across borders. But certainly, national regulation don't help. I mean, you've done lots of work on this. They make it even more difficult to operate in multiple countries. And there's some really good writing from what Vodafone tried to do in the early days, right? Which was...
Well, actually, I'll just pick up, because, Petra, if you don't mind, because I think it's a clarification. I have mentioned infrastructure, yes. I would say we're not just an infrastructure provider. So an example of this cross-border would be IoT. We're actually the largest IoT platform outside of China, from what my colleagues tell me. So IoT services, for example, is an example which we believe is, we see in financial services, for example, we have passporting. Why can't we have it, for example, when it comes to IoT, right? Or, when we look at EU-wide, when we go and look at regulation around SIMs and numbers and whatever, right? We don't, like, Draghi and Letta, we can all have our own reports or whatever, but I think we all agree, Letta and Draghi agree that the single market isn't working. And I don't actually even like to use personally the word telecoms per se. We like to work, we're a connectivity sector, right? But we're also a critical connectivity sector now. We're not just, if we now look at from a security and safety perspective, all of those additional costs as well that have been put on us collectively as a sector. So I think it's very important, I think David picks up, is we need to move from this traditional sort of telecom, and also I say that as someone who comes from outside of the sector, it's also about a mindset shift. What we're talking about, this ecosystem, is more of a connectivity sector, of which instead of fragmentation, can we maybe have some segmentation rather than fragmentation? Because I think we all agree that there is too much fragmentation. Like I said, I think IoT services is an example. I just looked at one of the figures. I think from the Commission was like, I think it's about 420 billion euros could be, if we got it right in terms of IoT and passporting and really unlock the single market. And my final point is, I think we have to be very careful that we're not looking to regulate the past, and we need to look to regulate the future, because a lot of the conversation, I think, is about now and sort of the past. Actually, I keep coming back to that what if. And if we look at China and the US, even if you look at 5G standalone, for example, my frustration is actually we have this, in China and in the US, we have more of a when, not if. If Europe had have taken that approach, we would never have had Nokia and Ericsson and had the advantage that we had at the time of when the mobile phone first was introduced. We've lost that advantage because we have moved back to that, right? On 5G standalone, we've got, I think, 25% now take up in the US. It's growing year on year. In China, it's nearly 80%. And we have this debate around, well, does it work? We don't know the full potential of these things. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but colleagues here in the services part would also agree we don't know that full potential. So I think that's also that mindset shift needs to change
not just in terms of how we operate as companies, but also how regulators operate and how policymakers and how politicians operate. They need to start to have that future-looking, whether it comes to competition policy or the Digital Networks Act. It needs to be more future-looking.
Can I just add one thing? Because I think the comparison with the US and China is interesting, and I don't think in terms of necessarily consumer outcomes, innovation, infrastructure rollout, in China there's some specific dynamics that are very different from Europe. But if we take the US as an example, I don't think that's necessarily something that we should seek to emulate. I think it's fine to be different from that perspective. But one area which I think we should all want is to have bigger European voices in the connectivity sector at a global stage, because it's still a sector that's highly standardized, where there are now very few vendors as well. So having the ability to influence, negotiate with those vendors is important. To shape their roadmap is important. And I think that's something that I think we should be focusing on a bit more. I don't think that consolidation in markets will get us there, right? I think it's consolidation in market might be more about the sustainability and the unlocking of the investment that you talked about. But certainly consolidation of one form or another across the European Union would create those bigger voices. And so I think how do we achieve this is a question that I'm interested in the context of looking ahead, not back.
Can I get your perspective on this as well? Also looking at the connectivity sector as a whole and the patchwork of what's part of that.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot to unpack between the two of you. Let me see how to start. I think for us it's always been also a question of like not kind of losing sight of what we're trying to do here and what regulation should aim to do. So from the perspective of what can we do better and what can the DNA do better than, let's say, the current code, for example, I think there is, as Darren was saying, I think there is a lot of call from the telecom operators to simplify, to streamline, to harmonize, which I think is a good goal, let's say, to have from the DNA perspective, and from the Commission's perspective. I think that is also the goal, like wider, that what we have seen across different sectors and different regulations of simplifying legislation and making life easier, let's say, for operators to compete as well and to be have less red tape and all of these kind of goals. I think that is all with the goal of providing the best connectivity to the end user, to the European businesses. We are looking at a massive digitization of industry that obviously relies on connectivity, and now with the advent of AI, the cloud targets that we have in Europe, etc. It's very important that there is that good environment for telecom operators to provide that connectivity. So I think we would agree with that is obviously the ultimate goal, to facilitate that. On the other hand, when we're talking about a level playing field, and if we're talking about adding regulation on other providers, and CDNs being one of them, cloud being the other one, within the DNA framework or within the code, let's say, telecoms framework, I think that kind of goes contrary to that whole goal of simplifying, because you will put additional regulatory burdens on other players, while also there is already more, in my view, and I think I would agree with David there, we obviously have already a lot of regulation for those specific players in other areas. So we have, not only DSA, DMA, we have NIS2, we have DORA, we have a lot of other, the AI Act, and lots of other things that come into play for players that are part of the ecosystem already. So increasing regulatory burdens for other parts of the ecosystem will also have an effect on the other players in the ecosystem, right? It will be a knock-on effect. And I would agree with what was said before about, is there even a need to do that? Is there not any other ways that we could cooperate? Is there not any other ways that the market could solve a lot of the issues, if there are issues, just to say, if there are issues that come up in certain areas. I think the focus of all of the efforts that have been done on the regulatory side, on the telecom side, has always been to improve connectivity and to make sure that there is a good framework to operate for the operators that actually provide that connectivity. So let's focus first and foremost on making sure that happens. before we would go into going into discussions around extending that framework or adding additional burdens on that. I don't know if you want to come in on that.
I mean, I completely agree. I see that on this point there is kind of a general agreement, but no, just commenting on two aspects. I very much agree with the concept of aiming for simplification throughout the ecosystem. So sometimes it's not focusing on just core telecom providers. It's focusing on how to enable a true single market for the players involved. We have examples of companies that provide innovative services that are already subject to the code, that face a lot of hurdles when it comes to authorization, when it comes to different kind of interactions with all the authorities, when it comes even to security features or like prevention of scams or frauds, thinking about know your customers, for instance. Little things that in the whole debate that was very much politicized and polarized kind of escaped the narrative, and which should be also subject to attention there, because again we have to look on how to eliminate as much as possible barriers of the single market. And again, the second point I very much liked that Darren mentioned was referred to definitions, and how to make you start from definition, you try to subtract substance from regulation, and you work towards, let's say, a simplified framework. That it doesn't mean as Petra was mentioning, including other actors and then subtracting again. We are talking about the whole set of simplification measures across the whole regulatory acquis in the EU. So it would be, narrow-minded to focus, okay, on this one, we include provisions from there. Siloed approach doesn't work, and we know that. So we look at, simplifying it, even other regulatory measures. We have overlaps between privacy regulation and AI regulation. We have overlaps here and there. So when it comes to the DNA, we have to look at it as included in a wider picture, and that's where we're trying, to work on, to try to flag the granular details when it comes, to potential improvements, both for subjects that are rightfully under the code right now, and subjects that are maybe in the ecosystem, but for the nature of their business model or their technical features and so on, are subject to other pieces of horizontal legislation or whatever it could be. You mentioned DMA, DSA, AI Act, but even Data Act for clouds, for instance. So I totally agree with this perspective. We should look at, simplification opportunities rather than, grasping here and there potential players just for the sake of it.
Yeah, you mentioned that some actors are already covered in a way by the Electronics Communications Code. Can you give us examples?
I mean, I was hinting at that. For instance, non-independent interpersonal communication services. There, there is quite some, and we talk about services that in many instances they provide services across Europe, so across 27 member states, and there they face a lot of hurdles when it comes, to administrative burdens, notifications, authorization regimes, and so on and so forth. But we have also, again, I was mentioning the SMS sender ID registries, for instance. We were mentioning the KYC. These are examples of players that are not traditional telecom providers, telecom service providers, but they're facing similar hurdles when it comes to providing services across member states, and they are the ones that generally are indicated as the ones suffering more from the current architecture. So this is the first example that comes to my mind.
Darren, can I get your view on this? Because indeed, some sectors are already a bit.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to start getting into the sector. I think I'm kind of reflecting on your airport and airlines point, and I think the only thing I would say is what's coming to my mind is highways or motorways, and I think what's slightly different from the airlines and the airport is that we're all using the same motorways. Right? Motorways which are, and traditionally have been built, maintained, and looked after by let's say, the telecom sector, and we obviously have traffic on these motorways. But, you know, if you've got too much traffic, or you've got, you know, as traffic builds and et cetera, obviously the motorways become degraded, they become less safe, they become less secure. And I think what we're saying is that to keep the motorways open, maintained and looked after is all our collective responsibility. And I think it's about, okay, how do we do that together, whether it is traditional motorways, telecom, or future, right? Whether it is cloud or virtualized networks. I think that's the slight difference, because we can't continue, unfortunately, to continue to maintain the motorways. Now, what we're saying is there other ways collectively that we can do this? For example, could we create, if we look at the open internet regulation, could we create maybe an additional motorway or whatever, one that you know, is for trucks, which could be, you know, the equivalent of when you have, you know, a toll road. I know there's a few, for example, in Spain or in the UK, where, you know, it's trucks only, or, you know, as you said, technological, you know, advancement or whatever, right? So we've got smart motorways. These are the type of things that we're talking about. So I think that's the only difference I would say, is that ultimately we're one way or the other, we're all using the same motorways, and therefore it's on that basis that that's sort of the basis in which, when we talk about a level playing field, that's what we're talking about when we talk about a level playing field.
Yeah, and if I can react on that, definitely so. It's a matter, as you said, of planning, of cooperation, of understanding how you could better manage the underlying infrastructure and so on. But it stops there. It's not, let's say, an obligation, an imposition. Like the highways, they require toll payments to drivers, not to car makers. You know what I mean? Yeah. But they cooperate for better cars, less better tires, for instance, whatever it could be. It's like. Or even with the institutions, to understand how to better maintain that infrastructure. So I definitely agree with your point that it's a matter of looking at the infrastructure and understanding how to make cost efficient the provision of that infrastructure for services and for service providers and for users. But that's kind of framed under that circumstance.
I think just to to take the analogy a step further, I think what we're saying is, unfortunately, like everyone on the roads, there are truck drivers who pay the toll. There are people who speed, there or whatever. Unfortunately, there are people who don't play by the rules. So, that's why, for example, and let's call the elephant in the room, the whole idea of a regulatory, we describe it as a backstop, and it should only be a backstop, right? We would like to be in the position, as you said, that and that's why in our responsible use of networks, we would like an industry solution, if we can get to that, some kind of an industry-wide code. But unfortunately, as I said, that was our learning from COVID, right? It took the intervention, sadly, of Commissioner Breton to get us all around the table to then deal with it when we were dealing in a crisis for an exponential amount of traffic. So, we've always said that it should only be a backstop. We are working with a lot of partners across the ecosystem to develop these new technologies, and that's the space I think I would rather we were concentrating on and working on. But there will be, unfortunately, people, as I said, who don't play by the rules of the road, and that's where our that's where the starting position came from certainly from a Vodafone perspective. But backstop is the key word. But we would rather focus on the other, on how we can manage to solve this with other solutions as well.
Right, David, I understand you have a reaction to give on the highway metaphor, and then afterwards we have questions on Slido already. So feel free to submit more if you want as well.
No, I think it's a terrible analogy. Sorry, Darren, because and it's not about. I don't think it's about drivers paying the toll, right? So there's different models, and I think all of these models are worth discussing. But maybe the better way to take this analogy around highways is is the place you're driving to paying for the highway? And you could have an approach which says, look, roads should be paid out of general taxation, right? And that's a very valid discussion. You can have obviously a model like we're used to in many European countries where the drivers pay the toll. I mean, arguably, when I buy my internet connection from my ISP, I pay the toll. Do I pay enough? That's a separate question, right? And I appreciate there's a tension between who pays for what, and there are some frictions between trying to limit price inflation for services like connectivity, which are seen as increasingly as essential services, and getting money from other parts. But I think we have to be very cautious, and I mean, I think the next panel will talk about some of these ideas. But we have to be very cautious, I think, about not breaking something that's been amazingly effective, scalable, resilient, right? By sort of trying to find kind of small or localized solutions to what's potentially a bigger problem. So I think the road analogy has.
But I would only just challenge to say that you've described it as what has been, I think, scalable and efficient, whatever. What we're saying to you is that, and what we're saying is that that's no longer the case for us as a sector, right? Our return on capital, it just, unfortunately, the economics aren't working. And your point around around consumers, we're a deflationary sector, right? We have been, even despite people thinking growth in traffic, etc., would drive up prices. That hasn't happened. But again, we come back to scale. It's all the scale game, right? If we can all achieve scale, right? So we look at the number of operators that we have, right, in Europe compared to the US, for example, right? And you look at the prices, etc. And I don't want to get into that debate, but the bottom line is, again, we're looking too far, in my view, to the past. What we're talking in the future, we will not be able to, on the basis of the economics, if you look at the reports, whether it's Draghi and Letta, currently, we will not be able to service the roads and the infrastructure going forward unless something changes. And what we're saying is there are two key changes. Digital Networks Act, so as I said, where we can create a level of efficiencies for scale, create an environment which we can grow new services, and then reform of the competition rule book. Hand in hand, we believe, as a starting point, is where we need to get ambitious as it is, and it needs to be ambitious. That will at least allow us to continue to be able to scale and maintain the roads and highways that are servicing, I think, the whole of the ecosystem. That's what we're saying.
If I can address a question from Slido now. Could we please address the connectivity resilience covering Europe? There is huge resilience fragmentation across Europe, landmass. Could I get a reaction maybe from Petra or Gabriele?
I'm not exactly sure.
I think the issue is on resilience, like how to make sure that the sector, connectivity sector, is more resilient to crisis. For instance, COVID, which we talked about collectively, the war in Ukraine, and there's many other examples.
I mean, there's maybe two different types of resilience that you can talk about, like the resilience of the actual physical infrastructure, and then the resilience of content being available or internet connections being available, I guess, which is more of a network level. And I think both of them are equally important. Obviously, I cannot necessarily talk about the physical infrastructure. Darren might come in on that one. I think for us, it's always the resilience point has always been an important one when we're discussing interconnection. So interconnection, the more interconnection you have, the more networks are interconnected with each other, the more resilience you have. The other paths can be found when there is a failure, there is an outage, there is certain problems in certain areas, specifically geographically, when there's maybe particularly in one country or across Europe. So for us, it's like fostering that interconnection ecosystem will also foster the resilience, of the networks. That is how the internet works, right? It's a network of networks. There's always routing that can be found if you have enough networks to connect to. So if there are any, from a regulatory perspective as well, like we've always said, like anything that kind of reduces the incentive of networks to connect with each other. And we're talking about the ecosystem and the way that everybody, cooperates. Cooperation also extends to interconnection and making sure that those interconnections are available and that are open and that everybody cooperates in that respect. I think that contributes very much to the resilience of the entire ecosystem across Europe. Europe is, countries are too small to be resilient on their own. Like, everybody is obviously connected to each other. We have obviously then, again, connectivity to the rest of the world as well. So there is obviously a whole question of maintaining that resilience. And for us, that's definitely through, trying to make sure that all those networks are as interconnected as possible. So I think that is definitely from Quover's perspective, like the way to also deliver content as close to the end user as possible is we do need to be interconnected with many networks. We are as well. So and also be present in lots of different places, and that makes sure that you have backstops and that you have ways to reroute when there is an issue in certain areas.
So I mean, on security resilience, I mean, just very simple. So first of all, can I just say that we actually cooperate with a lot of the other actors. So we look at subsea cables and other things. So I think it's a collective, we are showing a collective responsibility there. But my big message is security and resilience comes at a cost. David talked about cost. There is a cost. There is now a premium on security and resilience. And I think that's, so when we look at, for example, spectrum, right, could that, that again is money that's taking out of from us, we would potentially be able to reinvest that, right, in increased security and resilience, whether it is physical, cyber, or whatever it is. But it is probably the hot topic for us at the moment with the Commission. We also need, in terms of harmonisation, simplification. Obviously, there was the mention of all the list of whether it's NIS group, the ENISA, wherever it else. I think what we would also like to see, and I know the Commission and particularly DG Connect is, and I will say to their credit, is trying to drive that better harmonisation, because that's also gets, the layers is also a burden for us. But ultimately, it's a cost, right? And final point is your point around you're only as strong as your weakest point. So if you look at the DESI index, right, we talk to member states and they say, oh, well, particularly in Scandinavia, for example, we're investing high, but cyber attacks, other types of attacks, they don't care about geographies, right? They go cross-border, right? And that's also the mindset that we need at an EU level, because we can invest, we can collectively do whatever we want, but we need the regulatory framework to support that, and it currently isn't there. It needs to be simplified and it needs to be harmonised. And the final point is, more public-private partnership in this space, right? We need. We have very good examples, again, with some of our colleagues, whether it is Microsoft, IBM, or others with NATO, for example, right? There's a lot of good examples that I think at an EU level we can also replicate, and it is about that public-private investment. It's not just one particular sector that is responsible. It should be a joint accountability and responsibility, both government and private sector.
Gabriele, can you also comment on this? You have a broad membership.
Just adding a small point, because most of the elements were covered. I completely agree. It's a matter of boosting these by design. So till now it was mostly triggered by external threats and crises presenting themselves, but by design we should have this collaborative approach in defining public partnership. And there you mentioned subsea cables, for instance. It's one of the areas where there is more willingness to cooperate, but the same for cyber. And this approach should also be undertaken by member states that sometimes are not aware of the cross contamination that could happen when it comes to protecting themselves. And the extra point I would like to make is about redundancy. So, working on redundancy, working on technological neutrality, working on the uptake of potential alternatives and, other ways around, again, to avoid and to, let's say, put a bit higher that weakest point that Darren was mentioning, right? So I think that's also a key aspect when you want to, preserve a certain level of resilience or security.
Okay, if we can maybe conclude with each a bit of your views on this, what would the DNA look like in the future, ideally, in your view? And let's think about also, the market is evolving. It won't be as it is now in a few years, so the DNA needs to be future-proof. How do we do this? Maybe let's start with you, Petra, since you're right here.
So I think I talked a little bit about how, from my perspective, I think we do need to make sure that the connectivity ecosystem, as we call it, obviously continues to thrive in Europe, and also we see with the future we haven't talked that much about AI and about kind of future applications. I mean, we mentioned IoT as well. I think all of those need a very robust connectivity ecosystem, and end users and businesses in Europe especially need that if we want to, as Europe become more competitive. If there is, a drive to develop the use of AI and then the deployment of AI applications and the growth of businesses that work in that area, there is obviously a big need for a very robust ecosystem of connectivity, and I think the DNA can support that, and I think that's also obviously the intention that the Commission has expressed. And that is also partly by simplifying, the rules for the telecom operators, as we have heard from Darren, especially like how that is necessary. Then I think from the other players in the ecosystem, I think a lot of can be done on cooperation, and a lot of maybe more can be done on cooperation and collaboration between different players as we evolve. In our view, of course, that doesn't have to be through regulation. That is obviously, again, putting a lot of burdens, a lot of extra costs, and a lot of extra kind of regulation, while we actually all try to simplify and deregulate. And so that is the kind of caveat that I would make there. But not to say that there could not be a lot done, I think, in the space of between the different players, as we have also said on this panel today.
All right. David, if I can get your view, also circling back to what we talked about early on, right? This idea that there is only a limited amount of cloudification of the telecom sector, and the point that Darren made, that might be a market trend that is growing, and we want to be future-proof here.
Yeah, so I think I try and take a step back and kind of condense that, but I think, so I second very much what Petra said. I think if we think about what sort of objectives we want to achieve, I think incentives to invest throughout the Union is important. Louder European voices on the international stage for matters pertaining to connectivity is important. Not breaking the stuff that's working very well today, right, is important. We talked about resilience, we talked about security. I think being able to fund these things is also very important, but some of them, Gabriele alluded to it, but some of them are baked into, competition and diversity of approaches to connectivity. So for example, now we have great mobile networks that are providing spot resilience mechanisms when fixed networks go down. So things like this were not really engineered by design through regulation. They occur through technological progress and incentives to invest. So I think that's what I'd like to see. I mean, obviously, I personally would like to see more European harmonization. I come from a country which is, I think, proud of being in control of its own destiny, even though I'm not sure on a political level it's working very well. So I understand the frictions between member states and the EU level, but I think if we want to have a loud voice, that's what we have to do.
Darren, if I can move to you, and can you also mention the point about fragmentation of national countries' views on how to implement different legislations?
I think I'll answer stick to the theme, which is what do we want, I think, from the DNA, and it's a good segue from David, because I actually had written down before I even came in, we want a DNA that incentivizes investment, but it shouldn't be what we want here in Brussels at the end of the day, right, or what we want. At the end of the day, we're talking about it should be a DNA that delivers for citizens, for SMEs, and for business. And what we want to see is a DNA that allows us to continue to deliver best-in-class networks, to deliver services for the whole of the ecosystem. We have kind of what we call our 5 S's. So, the key pillars are spectrum. So we would like to see spectrum that, contributes to investment instead of takes the money out of the system. So we'd like to see, for example, potentially perpetual licensing, harmonization of the spectrum rules, simplification and completion of the single market. I think it's something that we've all agreed on today. Draghi and Letta are very clear. We don't have a single market for connectivity. We're one of the 3 top priorities, and I'd like to see that the DNA addresses that. Security and resilience, we talked about that as well. I think it's super, super important that is also a silver thread throughout the DNA. It can't be the security and resilience sits over here in some other part of the legislative book, and over here we have a DNA. It needs to be, we need a level of harmonization and consolidation there. Sustainability, and that then leads me then sort of a segue to what we would have called same service, same rules, or level playing field. And I think what we would like to say is that ultimately the DNA leads to a responsible use of network by all of the actors to deliver that best-in-class network, whether it is traditional network or whether it is networks in the future, whatever they look for. And I think that's ultimately what we would like to see from the DNA.
Thank you. Gabriele?
Yeah, so I mean, definitely agree with many points made. I'd like to underline there are a couple of 2 points. First of all, we would like to see a real in the DNA as a real enabler of best-in-class solutions, digitalization solutions, new innovations across the board. So more, capacity building that has different pillars, including security, of course, and resilience, and of course a way to foster more public-private partnership, as we said before, and a tool to enhance both customer and ecosystem security through the harmonization, because it's a bit underestimated how trying to harmonize and avoiding fragmentation across the board could actually help, enhancing security practices across the actors involved there. And another kind of wish we have would be to see an enhanced commitment for the country of origin principle for certain actors, which could actually again help in this push to harmonization and simplification, as we see different actors, as mentioned before, struggling there. And yeah, let me close it maybe with hoping that we will not have an omnibus after 2 years around the DNA.
The omnibuses keep coming, so you never know. All right, well, thank you so much to all of you, to my panelists. Thank you for the questions. I think there were more, but some of them will be for sure mentioned in the next panel, and they'll go back to the highway questions. So thank you so much.
I think we're going to ask you to come back here. This was a very short coffee break. We're going to have another one of 15 minutes later on after this second panel. So I'm going to ask everyone to come in. Do we have Peter? Everyone, please, we're starting. I guess we're going to have 1 minute. Then we go. Do you have Peter?
Start and you can with the next speaker.
Okay,
And then Thomas.
sure, we're going to do that. Romain, we are starting. Let's go. Okay, thank you everyone. So we're gonna start our second panel because we need to make sure we start on time. Peter is here. Okay, great. Thank you very much. So as said by Claudie just before, you can ask questions on Slido, so you do have some QR codes on the windows. The code screen is hashtag digital networks, so feel free to ask a question on Slido and then I will pick them up. This second panel is about the DNA and the open internet rules. In order to discuss this, I'm joined here by Peter Alexiadis, Research Fellow at the think tank CERE, Romain Bonenfant, General Director at the French Telecom Federation, Dalia Coffetti, Regulatory and EU Affairs at the Italian Association of Internet Providers, and Thomas Lohninger, Executive Director of European Digital Rights at Epicenter Works, and also non-residential fellow at CIS Stanford. Thank you. I'm going to ask you to maybe start with introductory remarks, presenting yourself, so that everybody in the room knows who you are, what you do, very quickly, and then we will start the discussion. Maybe starting with yourself, Thomas, can you present your work at Epicenter Works very quickly? I give you 1.5 minutes, 2 minutes.
Yeah, so I try to be brief. Basically, we've been involved in net neutrality for many, many years. We started off actually in 2012 when sending party pay was discussed. So this idea of network fees had a very early start in 2012 already, and it was not adopted back then. We were involved in the open internet regulation, also ran the campaign safetyinternet.eu. I was at the time also working here in Brussels as policy advisor for EDRI, and we kept with the issue ever since. All of the barrack reforms. We were very involved in the ECJ case that outlawed zero rating in Europe, also in the barrack reform around 5G. Sometimes we do litigation. We've done so in Portugal, in Colombia, and right now in Germany. We are suing Deutsche Telekom because of their interconnection practices, together with the National Consumer Organization. And yeah, and the ongoing DNA debate, and previously also since 2022, since Breton started this, we also try to be a voice of reason from civil society, ensuring that net neutrality is upheld.
Dalia, coming back to you, can you also present your work at AIP, as we say for short, and the campaign called the Stop the DNA campaign?
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for the invitation. Well, for those who don't know IP, because we are new here in the EU bubble, IP is the first Italian ISP association, active since 1995, and for 30 years has contributed to the development of Internet in Italy and Europe. We are member of ECTA and founding member of EuroISPA. We count more than 60 providers, and our members are mainly very high capacity network access members, access providers with fixed and wireless technologies, data center provider, as well as the largest Italian cloud service providers. This summer, in parallel with the launch from the EU Commission of the call for evidence on the DNA, we launched this campaign to oppose the DNA, which is called Stop the DNA, because while a lot of supporters are arguing that the DNA claims to modernize regulation, simplification, foster investment, we believe that the DNA, as it's been shaping, could threaten the decades of progress in competition, infrastructure, and sovereignty in the European telco sector. Key concerns are essentially a shift toward oligopoly and concentration of control of network in just few major players, pushing smaller operators like our member into being mere resellers. Other problematic issues are that prices for internet and services could rise for everyone. There is a risk of centralized regulatory power in Brussels, pushing aside NRAs, a local body that for decades have ensured fair competition, consumer protection, and market balance. Last but not the least is that the DNA will not just touch upon major telco operators, but will have an impact on the entire ecosystem made of local ISPs, manufacturers, content providers, internet exchange point. So in a nutshell, the campaign is to say no to a new regime where few big players dominate the whole sector and where innovation shrinks. So we are asking for maintaining competition and fair prices for citizens and end users.
Okay, thank you very much for this complete description. Maybe coming to you, Romain, so the Fédération Française des Télécoms represents the three biggest players in France. I won't ask you about whatever's happening with buying not SFR, but more on present the telecom operator's perspective on the open internet, because this is the topic of a debate, and maybe also a few words on fair share.
So thank you very much, and thank you for having me. Thanks to the CCIA. So yes, the French Telecom Federation is representing the telecom operators in France. Not only three big operators actually, but we have 25 members of all sizes, active on B2B, B2C market, all different types of activities on the telecom market, so very different approaches. So let me start with the fair share debate. The perspective on our members on this is actually a general issue on how the internet economics work. The internet economics as we know it today is coming from the origin of the internet. The origin of the internet, as we all know in this room, is actually starting from universities, research centers, individuals, researchers connecting. And they were more or less equal. I mean, the traffic was relatively balanced, and there was no need to bother with accounting, tracking flows, and having sort of commercial agreements on this. And that was very fine. And today, it's still a very good model for most of the internet. In our view, this model should be preserved at all costs. And it's actually still valid for, I would say, more than 99.999, take really the number of 9 new ones, % of the internet users. But we have to face reality. And reality is that internet has changed. We are witnessing in our network traffic coming from a handful of players who is actually growing and generating the need to do specific investment to accommodate this growth. So these players who actually account for, I would say, 50% of the traffic in general in France, probably more than 80% if you look at peak hours for mobile in dense areas, for example. This handful of players have a different role. In our view, they should have a specific responsibility to have some sort of traffic efficiency and to have a capacity to make the right decision in the service they deliver. They are different because when they design their services, when they choose the type of compression for video, for example, when they choose to preload videos on a video portal, they have a direct effect on actually what the telecom operators have to invest in their network. And this is the whole issue of fair share, a price signal to achieve traffic efficiency. So this is what we are defending. And maybe coming back to what Maria Teresa said in the beginning, that we need to have regulation only what is wanted, when there is a market failure. Indeed, there is a market failure here. And why? Because we have regulation on the open internet, regulation which only applies to the telecom operators. We love this regulation. We wouldn't want to change a comma of it, but it only applies to telecom operators. So what we want to have, actually, this type of pricing of traffic flows is to extend the open internet rules to these major traffic providers.
Thank you very much. Peter, now is your turn. Can you maybe present us who you are, of course, and the study you co-authored for Sarah with Plum on the IP interconnection market?
Yeah. Okay. Hi, nice to be here. Nice to see so many familiar faces. My disappointment is that AI can't make me look any thinner, but hopefully someone in this room can work on that. You know, and let's get real. But moving on, I'm a practitioner for 34 years in Brussels, working on competition and regulatory issues in telecoms and digital platform issues. I assisted the Commission when we formulated the current regulatory framework back in 1998 for 2002, and then I have also assisted in the regulation of digital platforms. Currently, working for Sarah, we did a series of studies on looking forward towards deregulation, possibilities for deregulation. We endorsed a number of the principles, in parallel, by the way, that the Draghi report introduced in terms of making the burden lighter and so forth. That doesn't mean to say that we agree with all the principles. And in retrospect, I think we possibly didn't do what we should have done, which was to say that, you know, if you push on the mergers lever, you don't push on the regulatory lever at the same time. We portrayed different options available to regulators without sort of saying that, well, you can't have both. You either go for one or you go for the other. And in retrospect, it would have been nice to have done that, but if you read the report, you'll see that we are advocating a loosening of certain regulatory norms, not fundamental ones like access and so forth. Then to Plum Consulting, where we looked at the IP interconnection issue and whether or not there is validity in going towards a dispute settlement procedure. And there, do I have 30 seconds?
Yeah, still.
Yeah. And there we looked at the validity of an IP dispute resolution issue in the context of IP interconnect. And my role in that was the legal side, and my conclusions were that IP interconnect is not amenable easily to a dispute resolution type scenario. It doesn't fit any of the traditional boxes that we as lawyers feel comfortable about using for dispute settlement. It's not between adversaries. It's not between people who are likely to disagree on contract. It's not likely to be addressing a clear and well understood market failure. It's not likely to be suppressing market power. Therefore, on balance, there's no need for it, because the only reason it would be used would be to be gamed by people who have the last mile to constantly create disputes. And it's the easiest thing in the world to create a dispute. The reality is we've found that given how long the internet has been functioning, for the amount of time it's been functioning, that the number of disputes that have really occurred, that have manifested themselves in any meaningful way, is trivial. And in an environment in which we are looking towards less regulation, more streamlined regulation, the idea of increasing regulation in this particular way is nonsense, quite frankly. And on top of that is likely to lead to a lot of collateral damage, some of which we understand, much of which we don't understand. We're in the Donald Rumsfeld known unknowns. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I think we're going to
come back to this, but because this panel is about the open internet, I'm going to start with questions on the open internet. And so I've asked myself a very silly, stupid question, I guess, which is, will the DNA actually reopen the open internet? And actually, the Commission doesn't say that very clearly. The operators, when they answered to the public consultation on the DNA, didn't say that as well. I'm failing to see a clear push for revising the rules. What there is for sure is a discussion on we need an update of the rules for these new specialized services, especially 5G slicing, so using one slice of 5G for B2B services and then keep the rest for the internet as we know it with the open internet rules. So in a way, the Commission is agreeing with that. So is there really an issue here that the open internet rules are really being threatened currently and in the DNA that's going to be tabled in 2 months? What do you think, Thomas?
I wish this were not the case. I really would like us not to revisit the open internet regulation because this means a lot of work for me and for everyone. And the uncertainty this will entail is really not what we need right now. But sadly, it's absolutely certain for me that we have to prepare for this. Not just because actually the telecom industry is calling for that. Some of my FOIA requests that are public at Ask the EU clearly show ETNO members calling for this. And if you take the call for evidence together with the questionnaire for the impact assessment, and we also had discussions with the Recruitants people, they at least want to harmonize it. So I expect the open internet regulation to be included in the DNA and thereby opened up for amendments. That surely will happen because we know who the players are in Parliament at least. And there's also an obvious push to make carve-outs for 5G. So we will have to revisit the whole specialized service debate, which is also crazy because a decade ago under Commissioner Günther Oettinger, we had all of these debates and came to a good conclusion. And yet in Europe, actually, it has worked quite well. There was a lot of legal clarity. And those magical, innovative services around 5G, they haven't happened in Europe, but they also haven't happened in Asia. They also haven't happened in other regions like the US that no longer have a net neutrality framework. So it's really betting a lot of what has worked in the best effort open internet for magical thinking. And I think that is not evidence-based policy making. Other things are at stake as well. I mean, I wouldn't exclude the risk of the zero rating prohibition to be opened up. That is purely resting on case law from the ECJ. So many of these things are up for grabs now. And net neutrality will also be directly affected with any form of interconnection regulation. Also, as you put it, let's keep the rules as they are, but do what Italy did, just open them up also, not to be between ISPs, but also between ISPs and CAPs. That will lead to exactly the same thing. And we can demonstrate in Germany the harm this will cause for consumers. Hence, we and the consumer protection organizations sued against Deutsche Telekom, because we can demonstrate that the freedom of choice is restricted, that startups are asked to pay enormous amounts of money. Like we have cases of startups that are asked to pay 3-4 figure amounts a month, and otherwise their users from Deutsche Telekom complain to them that their service isn't working. And this trickles down also from the small hosters. So there's actually already this risk that we see with the very large telecom operators that they are abusing their termination monopoly. And if we don't intervene here, what we are doing is we are applying the open internet regulation on the interconnection market, which is something that BEREC clearly highlighted as a regulatory option in their December 2024 report. And then maybe also to conclude, like this idea of network fees, how reasonable it is, how maybe good or necessary it is. Let me just start with the high-level demands. We have, I think, in total 8 BEREC opinions against this, only 4 in this ongoing debate since 2022. We have the competition authorities of several countries saying this would be a really bad idea, please go away. And also the media regulators that are warning this would be bad for media plurality. So I think that the picture is very clear what the harms are, and I have yet to be convinced why we need this.
Okay, there's a lot to unpack, I guess, more than just open internet. Maybe I want to give you a chance to answer whether, as is written in the answers to the public consultation, operators want an update or a full renewal of the rules, but also answer to this claim that it's also very possible that if there is a reopening of the open internet, then there might be amendments to do more and include zero rating, for instance.
No, to be very clear, and maybe I'll clarify again what I said in the introduction, we do not want to change the rules of open internet as they apply to telecom operators today. We're very fine with the rules. As in, we are in a technologically evolving sector. Of course, there are new questions, there are novel issues we have to look at. 5G slicing is clearly one of them, but this can be clarified through guidance from the Commission. You don't need to reopen open internet rules, and clearly we do not want that. The point we're making in relation to the fair share debate is actually, I hear the whole question of market power on the termination line and so on, but frankly, when you look at the situation today, the fact that we have is very stringent open internet rules at the level of telecom operators and how internet economics works today, I think the issue of market power is not on the side of telecom operators. And actually, this is why there are no disputes at all. This is why we don't see this dispute resolution actually appearing in the market, because it's just impossible to negotiate. How can a telecom operator today negotiate with one of the 4 or 5 large traffic generators? Because these large traffic generators can retaliate. They can change the quality of service of actually what they provide to the consumer. They can discriminate between the different telecom operators, the service they provide. They can change the tarification based on the condition of actually interconnection with the different operators. It's not fantasy. It's just what happened in South Korea. In South Korea, a tarification has been applied through a court on a specific operator. As a result, there were clear retaliation measures from a number of service providers, degrading the quality of service for users. So actually, the threat for users today is on the side of large traffic generators, and this is in this area where we need additional rules. Does that mean technically reopening the open internet regulation? I don't know. It can be done in different ways, but we need a framework to have commercial agreements between telecom operators and service providers. There are already hints for it in this regulation. If you look at recital 7 of this regulation, actually there are some flavor of this commercial agreement, the fact that there needs to be some supervision of a public authority, and so on and so on, and this is what we should build upon.
I see. I'm going to give you a time to answer as well, but first I want to ask Peter, do you see, because you worked on these topics, a business case for 5G slicing? As Thomas said, he's not sure he believes in it.
Well, it's an interesting question. This is my personal view. I believe there was a case for 5G slicing had we prepared for it earlier. I think the market has moved on very, very quickly to the point now that if there is slicing, and there's no reason why it shouldn't be, there might be very, very little take-up of it, because already there are alternative models out in the marketplace, which means that 5G slicing might not be interesting from a demand point of view anymore. So the chance was there. I think maybe from a commercial point of view, the chance is gone. But that's not to say that we shouldn't give the opportunity to do so, because I think it's something that can be policed by regulators pretty well. So yes, allow it. If traditional telcos can't take it up and can't take advantage of it, despite telling us for years that they could, well, that's their problem, I think. That's one point. On net zero, it's my personal view again, I think the court went too far, and I think coming back and modifying net zero and allowing it in certain circumstances is probably okay, as long as we understand what situations there are there. The court went too far.
Can you define what zero rating is or net zero, because I'm not sure everybody
knows.
Everybody knows.
Yeah, everybody knows. So I think that and then when it comes to the IP interconnect, like I said, I think that's a different issue. I think there's a lot of collateral damage out there to the whole internet ecosystem, some of which we clearly understand, some of which we clearly don't understand the magnitude of. There will be an impact on price, because it'll filter through the whole system. There will be an impact on quality. And when we turn this discussion about Korea, was it a question of the caps or the CDNs degrading quality, or was it a question of the caps and the CDNs migrating their connectivity outside Korea to avoid the high charges, which then led to the degradation? So it's cause and effect. I take the view that it's the latter, not the former. They didn't degrade the quality of their own product. The degradation occurred because of the circumvention, or in the old days we used to call it in telecoms, tromboning.
I guess technically you could do that as a content provider. You could downgrade the quality of your service, but I mean this is a question that is technical. I'm not sure. I guess the court didn't judge on this anytime soon. So I guess we can have both views on this discussion. Maybe I wanted to go to you, Dalia, with the same question, because you also represent internet providers. Do you see a case for 5G slicing and therefore a case to amend the open internet rules?
Yeah, we don't see a case for 5G slicing because it's just one of the many techniques to manage data traffic. And yeah, we can reduce the whole debate of open internet on 5G slicing, as well as we don't see a specific need to open the open internet rules, and access to the internet should be best effort. Every other promotion or offers should be treated separately and sell on top of the best effort. So for us, there's no case on 5G slicing.
I see, Thomas, you wanted to come in.
Yeah. I think it's important to clarify what the current regulatory situation is if we discuss any movement away from it. Right now, we have clarity on 5G, and you're free to provision any type of network slice as long as the user is in control which applications that network slice is using. That is what Barrack gave us with the 2020 guideline reform. So yes, you are free to innovate, but the users who are ultimately also paying for the 5G are the ones who should decide which apps get to use it. Similarly to zero rating. You are completely free to adopt any type of application-agnostic zero-rating model. The code was very clear. You could have night times off when the network is idle anyway. You could not deduct that from monthly data caps. As long as the user is in charge, everything is fine. And on the question of interconnection, let's not kid ourselves. No video streaming provider is sending you a 4K video just because they're funny. It's a user who has clicked this. A subscriber from the ISP who is paying for that connection has requested the data. And yes, we have a market concentration there. And I agree with you that this is a problem and big tech should be split up. But German Monopoly Commission, Austrian Bundeswettbewerbsbehörde, and many other competition authorities looked at this. This is not the way to go here. So the users are the ones who are requesting that traffic, and the CAPs are the ones who are serving that. You mentioned incentives for traffic efficiency. The CAPs have an incentive to not cloud up the network of the ISPs, because they also have to pay for their traffic. They also have servers, and we've seen over the past decade so many inventions here in terms of encoding and reducing the efficiency. It takes so much fewer bandwidth today than it did a few years ago to serve live video content. And that's good, because we all have an incentive to be efficient with the traffic that we consume. I mean, it's not really consumable, but nevertheless, it's a utilization of a resource. And therefore, I really don't see why this new model of changing the network topology would actually make sense. Because right now, what is the current model? For all but just a very few big ISPs, how do you connect with other networks? You usually have many connections, many peering connections, and usually those are settlement-free. Barrick found this over and over again. Settlement-free peering is the standard, and it's also the most efficient and best way to connect networks. And then you have, should I explain?
Standard, of course, for sure, absolutely, for 99.999,
exactly.
How many, as many nines as you want, % of the cases. But it's also true that content providers, which are a handful, provide more than 50% of the traffic. So even though the thousands and millions of other persons who are using the internet, you don't pay, and that's all right. There's maybe a question here. A handful of players are sending 60% of the traffic on the networks. So there's maybe a need to intervene here.
Again, like it is the user with their paying subscription who is requesting that. And on the solution, in my opinion, we have something, it's called transit. And the big distinction between the networks that are abusing their termination monopoly and those who are not doing this is whether or not their transit connections are working. And if your transit is constantly over capacity, then you are creating this artificial scarcity that allows you to extort this type of money. And we would rather have freedom of choice where it doesn't matter which hoster you have and how that concrete connection towards the ISP, which users you want to serve, is working at this moment. Because this decentrality and redundancy is really what made the internet so vibrant.
I see.
Maybe to come back to the question of the user. You're perfectly right, the user clicks. But what is happening after that click? It's not the user who decides, it's actually the service provider. The fact that, for example, when you go to any video portal, sometimes you have preloading of video in very high quality and so on. This is sort of wasted traffic. It's not our place to judge. But we are just saying that as there is no price signal whatsoever to the service provider, of course, it should provide gold-plated experience, it can enrich its services with no limits whatsoever and so on. And actually, the situation will become worse and worse when we will deploy gigabit everywhere in Europe, because currently the actual limit is that if a service provider is actually serving only 4K videos, in some part of Europe it won't work. Okay? But once we have achieved a very high level of connectivity, it will be a different case. So there is really a lack of incentive to have an efficient management of traffic at the level of service provider. And this actually comes to the question of what investment are we talking about when we discuss about the specific investment generated by the traffic of these few large traffic generators. Actually, more than 80% of it is in the access network. So the transit issue, in our view, is off topic. The problem we have very concretely in our network is that we have to deploy, for example, new mobile sites in dense area in France because we have this increase of traffic, and this increase of traffic is clearly caused by the behavior of a few large traffic generators. Let's come back to the highway metaphor we like very much in the first panel. Let's imagine that on a highway you have 4 or 5 companies sending tons of lorries on the highway and congesting the highway. The question we have, similar to the fair share, is who would pay to enlarge the road? Is it to the highway provider? Should it be passed on to any user to actually subsidize these 4 or 5 companies? Or is it to these companies? This is the quick question of fair share.
Yeah. Made me think of Waze and the issue they had with traffic routes that were going through villages in France and destroying the roads. But let's not continue with the analogy. You wanted to come in, Peter?
Yeah, I wanted to say a couple of things. I wanted to say to everybody who leaves this room, when you go down the street and you go past the Proximus store, have a look at what Proximus is advertising for you. They're advertising for you the fact that you can get, not that you can get broadband, the fact that when you get broadband, you get access to all this wonderful content, all these nasty big content providers. So they're driving demand, they're driving the product, and they're the bad guys. Sorry, I can't see that. I really can't see that. Are they changing the mechanics of how you do work your network? Maybe they have. Let's look at the empirical data. But the data is also clear that the big content providers, the CDNs, the CAPs, they are spending 5 billion per annum, according to Analysis Mason, per annum to get their networks closer to the end consumer, i.e. limiting all the traffic, limiting all the excessive use of capacity, etc., etc. So it works two ways. They're investing, they're getting closer to the customer, and secondly, the product, the fundamental product, is the product that's driving demand on their networks, on the networks of telcos. So you can't have it both ways and every way.
I find it quite interesting what you just said, that content providers are investing in CDNs, because I believe at the time we had this discussion around fair share in 2022 when there was still a former Commissioner Breton in charge. CCIA Europe published a press release that I have here, 13 October 2022, you can look it up on the internet, which says tech firms invest 22 billion per year in internet infrastructures. And it made me wonder, with this argument of saying that we also invest in telecom infrastructure, didn't he came up to the mind of a commission thinking, oh, well, if content providers invest in infrastructure that they consider telecom, shouldn't they be regulated as well? Do you think that's how they might have thought? And then came up with an IP regulation mechanism?
So we regulate everybody.
Yes.
So we regulate everybody in the value chain. I don't think that's a viable option. And also, the other point I forgot to mention, the open network regulation does allow the ability of telcos to deal with capacity constraints if they're technical. Okay, you have that ability. It's not as if there's no ability there, and we're talking about Brave New World. There is an option there, but prove it. Don't just allege it. Prove it.
Maybe the Commission will prove it to us. They are currently ongoing the impact assessment through the scrutiny board, so we'll see quite soon, I guess. I have another question. If I take the consumer perspective, sometimes I wonder, net neutrality rules, when it was created, it was created with a clear view of allowing end users to access any type of content in the internet in the same way. But now, if I think of like what is the main window to the world in the internet at the moment, it's not anymore having a broadband connection. It's TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, etc., etc. And if we look at the regulation that the EU has put in place on these companies, mainly the DSA and the DMA, to actually create some kind of net neutrality or content neutrality, the EU is having quite a hard time to implement these rules. So when I hear telecom operators saying we basically want a net neutrality extended to content providers, I also feel like there is something from the end user perspective that actually makes sense. Thomas?
Yeah, but it really makes no sense to use the same framework on both of us. And we've worked on the DSA. We were quite aware of the problems in content governance and on the market concentration, but I can tell you that net neutrality simply does not provide you the tools to adequately address these problems. And we don't have better enforcement if we make the rules more complicated. And there is really a big gap of enforcement on data protection, on many elements, but also on net neutrality. I mean, we still have some grandfathered zero rating products out there in the EEA. So it's not as if all regulators are really doing their job properly. I think the user perspective is important, and net neutrality is something that the EU was very proud to adopt, and many users take for granted now because it is an expression of how to implement freedom of speech, how to have the freedom to innovate. And I think European businesses would absolutely not understand why there's suddenly a way to pay for privileged access. Ultimately, the lack of net neutrality always comes down to this question. The big tech companies will be happy to pay the toll. And for Deutsche Telekom, they are already doing it. It's the smaller providers that cannot afford these fees. And they will have the complaints from users. Our submission to Bundesnetzagentur has many of those. And just need to touch on two things, like this whole question of 50% of the traffic comes from big tech. Those are aggregated numbers globally. If you look in any individual country, you'll see that there are hosters, there are public and private broadcasters, there are porn websites that make up an awful lot of traffic as well. And even if you say, yeah, but it's only those VLOPs, the big tech companies, according to the DSA, I mean, German public broadcasters are hosting on Google, or we have many e-government services on Microsoft's cloud. So there is simply not this attribution that's not so straightforward. Yeah, Disney at the beginning of the network fee debate did not operate its own network, and would they not pay? You know, is Disney not too big to pay? Like, it simply does not work. And if you then use privacy technologies like a VPN or Apple Privacy Relay, you're completely outside of any calculation as well. Would then the VPN provider or Apple have to pay for all the traffic from iPhones? So I know it might sound logical at the beginning, but for anyone working with the networks, anyone with a bachelor's degree in engineering or in economics, this will be laughed at. I know that Brussels right now is having a debate for many years around this issue, and many people have been convinced over the year, but there's a reason why Thierry Breton was laughed at in council when he proposed this. Because once you talk with affected companies and other institutions, they all tell you it's crazy. And I'm sorry to say, but this whole DNA reform, I'm with you. Let's really scale it down, because it will be a failure. And last point, if we really open up the open internet regulation, I'm very clear on the historical example. I'm going to quote Donald Trump's first term. He's the only one who dared to repeal net neutrality. Is this the example that Henna Virkonen wants to follow?
Yeah, I'm going to give you a chance to answer.
To be clear again about what we want regulation or rules which are as light touch as possible. Concretely, it means having an obligation for large traffic generators to negotiate in good faith, so good faith obligation for this negotiation, which do not happen today. 2, to have open internet rules extended to the service level, not to have the possibility to discriminate between the different networks. And 3, the possibility to have a dispute resolution mechanism with an independent arbitrator, which could be the national regulatory authority. So we want something which is as close as possible from the commercial world. In the end, we want just commercial agreements between telecom operators and large service providers that would solve our issue. And actually, this is needed because of the rules we have on the telecom market. It's actually the economic side on what we have on the telecom market. We have very strong regulation on competition. That's very good. We have open internet rules. This is very good. But this is because of these 2 reasons that commercial agreement cannot happen magically, because our hands are tied. We do not ask to untie our hands. We just ask to have a negotiation at arm's length with the service providers. Coming back just maybe very quickly to the argument that in the end, these service providers, which are not villain or bad guys, or we work with them on a number of issues, we're just saying there is a lack of a price signal somewhere in the market, are creating value to the users and ultimately are actually driving the value in the telecom market. I think all the person in the room in the telecom sector know that actually value has been decreasing. When you look at prices in telecom for telecom services in France, it has decreased by 10% in 10 years. In nominal terms, you look at real value, it has fallen down by like 25, 30%. So if it is a result of value creation by service providers, I would say they have destroyed value in our market. Of course, that's absurd. It's not the case, because there is no link between the value created by service provider and direct impact on our market. Actually, if you look at the economics of revenue of telecom operator, it's based on the number of users. It's not based on traffic. It's not based on bandwidth. Traffic and bandwidth are driving our costs, not our revenues. So this is the issue at stake. We are saying our revenue are constrained, our costs are going up because of specific investment we have to make for these traffic generators, and this is where we need some sort of commercial agreements.
Okay. I want to come back to something you said, quoting your latest, an approach of a latest rules regime, because something like that just happened in Italy, and maybe, Dalia, you want to talk about that, this Italian case of a AGCOM regulator who decided to regulate CDNs as telecom infrastructure following a very Italian case of football matches that which streaming quality was quite bad. Maybe you want to come in.
AGCOM, the Italian national regulation of communication, published its decision after a public consultation run this spring that stated that CDNs are now considered electronic communications network. But this decision, I think, dates back to 2020-2019 when DAZN brought the exclusive right to broadcast Italy's Serie A football matches. The first year was a disaster because when fans tune in, many couldn't even watch the game. So the Italian Italian AGCOM stepped in, ordering DAZN to fix its streaming problems. And to fix it, DAZN created its own content delivery network called DAZN Edge. But after this private CDN, AGCOM decided that DAZN should operate under the Telco general authorization regime. So in this year, the Italian authority thought to recreate a level playing field among CDNs providing services in the Italian market, and that's why we arrived to this decision in August. Now it's up to the MIMIT, the Ministry of the Industrial Development and Made in Italy, to set the condition for CDNs to apply for general authorization regime. We are aware that this decision created a lot of debate in Italy and here in the EU bubble because it could create a backdoor for the reintroduction of a fair share through the IP dispute resolution mechanism. But I would like to hear your view. Yeah?
Let me say that we asked AGCOM because we wrote a great piece about this case on your active website, and they completely deny it.
Yesterday they were in Naples for a seminar on piracy and Piracy Shield. So Capitanio, which is the one that deals with the CDN, was there. Maybe it's for this reason he's not here, but I'm sure that this topic is a bit, it's sort of a slippery slope for them because they don't want to talk about it because they are reducing everything to piracy and maybe force CDNs to comply with the Piracy Shield, but maybe they have not seen that this could lead to a backdoor for fair share and network fees.
I see. Thank you. You wanted to come in at some point?
Yeah, I mean,
yes?
the dangers with the Italian approach, and sympathy there, because if there's two things that are sacred in Italy, it's football and pasta. So you can imagine what a difficult decision it would have been here. But the danger here is that the CDNs get classified as public electronic communications networks. Electronic communications networks, I don't think too many people in this room would say, oh, I'm very upset if they're classified as electronic communications networks, but it's public. And I don't think they're public, because if they are public, then we're in a whole world of pain at EU regulatory level. If we want to deregulate and we say that those sorts of services are to the public at large, then 3/4 of the people in this room are probably public electronic communications network operators for whatever they do. So that's a slippery slope that we don't want to go down. Tough cases make bad law, so the background is there, and I'm sure the Commission is going to, look at this very, very, very carefully. But going back to fair share, let's look at the policy debates. And I don't want to sound too harsh on this, but I probably have to be. it started off in the good old days back in Dubai, where we said network sending party pays. Rejected. Then it went to fair share. Rejected. Now we've got IP interconnection, which will inevitably, if it goes in, because of the gaming aspect, which I mentioned, it'll lead to a basically fair share network sending party pays. So credit to the telecoms industry in the sense that they are environmentally sensitive because they keep recycling the same argument. But they do call it something different, so that the pig has red lipstick the first time, blue, and then now mauve, possibly. It's the same pig, though, okay? It doesn't matter what you call it. It's the same argument. It's, the internet has changed, somebody else is making a lot of money out of it. How do we get a bit of that? That's not the sound basis for regulation. Sorry, it's not. There are no entry barriers to telcos. And, at the end of the day, if the knock-on effect to the rest of the industry, to the rest of the internet ecosystem is as wide as it's going to be, telcos should be careful about what they want. You can imagine Musk, someone like Musk, just saying, I've got satellites, I'll buy a bit of content, I'm just going to come be a European operator, or I'll just do it all through wireless. In terms of capacity. Yeah, they can do it. So don't, you're in a great situation, you're the conduit between the end user and the content provider. They've got the content, you've got the customer, you're doing very nicely here. Don't try to make it so difficult for the content provider to sort of approach the consumer indirectly through you. You are the retailer. You are the independent retailer. You are remunerated for what you do. You're not the agent of the content provider, or you're not their agent, so you're not them. So take your profits where they are and don't try to multiply the profits as often as you can throughout all levels of the value chain. That's what I'm trying to say. It's just like somebody else is making money, I've got to have a bit of it. That doesn't sound right. And it talk about asking for trouble in terms of trade wars. That's the biggest one, because that's sticking out so obviously as being rapacious. I don't want to go into it any further, but don't give the Oval Office excuses to run roughshod over us. This is an item where I think it's going to be a really bad one to pursue.
I'm going to give you a minute because we need to take a question from Slido, but yes, please go on.
Yeah, we know that the world of hot air is economically, is environmentally friendly, but if you look at reality, I mean, the point is we have to make real investment in access, which is linked to this incremental traffic. If you look actually, we made a study on France actually, and in total we find that actually the incremental increase in traffic of these 4 or 5 global players amount to roughly 15% of our investment. So the question is not, we have a lot of investment to make, so let's find someone to pay. It's just to say, so large traffic generator generate a specific cost in our network and they have to pay for it. That's it.
And I think I was looking at the economic model of fair share. The Toulouse School of Economics published a report back in 2022, and they were saying that the right way to do fair share would be to have it on advertisement only, and then if you would do it in the right way, then the price of subscriptions to telecom operators would drop. So maybe that's an economic model to look at for. I want to take one question from Slido. Sorry, Thomas. I have a question saying an estimated 24% of bandwidth is being used to deliver pirated or infringing content. If you want to free up bandwidth, so I guess it's for you, Romain, will you support EU legislation to tackle piracy?
Well, we have a lot of national legislation on it because, as you may know, the right holders in France are very, very active. So daily we take down a number of websites. We have a lot of activities, for example, on online piracy for live sport event, for example, when we are blocking many sites. So we are doing it already. So it can be at EU level, but I must say we are we have already very good national legislation on this.
Okay. Thomas is coming.
On the piracy question, just briefly, I think the main reason is just that we have too many streaming services and people cannot afford 10 subscriptions. That's why privacy is increasing again. So I think we should tackle that and not in any traffic capacity. And the other thing that I just wanted to mention is just a few years ago, when zero rating was still allowed, all of this traffic that's now clouding up the network, and as you said, traffic drives our cost, not our revenue. So many ISPs in Europe had zero rating offers. Very often you do not even have to pay to have certain apps zero rated. We actually did a complete survey in 2017 which apps are zero rated, and the majority of them are exactly the big tech companies that they are now complaining about. So why could we see from 2016 till 2022 the majority of YouTube traffic, from Facebook traffic and so forth, we have seen zero rating products all over in all but 2 European countries. And now, while zero rating is outlawed, suddenly that same traffic that was just subsidized has become this major problem for network operators. I don't understand the economics here.
Maybe I don't want you to answer, but very quickly, that's something I've been asking myself. If we have fair share and the end of the open internet, then very probably we will have deals between content providers and operators. But will we then be in a situation where the end user will have to pay a subscription to an operator and get free use of TikTok, free use of Instagram, and actually, be completely trapped in this, in having a door to only one type of contract that is actually, addictive, some say, harmful, some others say, and actually be in a situation that will be far worse off. That's a question for you first, Romain. Maybe you, Peter.
It's not what we want for us. Fair share and what I try to describe is a wholesale issue. It's not a retail issue. It should not have consequences whatsoever on the user, very clearly. Regarding the possibility to discriminate at the retail level, the question of caps you mentioned also rightfully, Thomas. In fact, when you look at how markets work today, there is, for example, in the mobile, envelope-based competition. Competition is so hard in France, it's impossible to have a, I would say, meaningful cap on mobile. The meaning cap in France for mobile subscription are 100 gigabytes, 200 gigabytes. People consume like 17 gigabytes, I think, today on average. So it's not really volatile. It's impossible. There's too much competition downstream.
Okay, thank you very much. So we are almost done. So I'm going to give you 30 seconds each. And because I come from the business side, I was a consultant before, I love this type of question. So imagine you're at the European Parliament, you just met an MEP, suddenly you take the elevator, the elevator opens, ding, Henna Virkkunen is inside. You got 30 seconds with her to tell her what should be inside the DNA. What do you say? Peter, you're up.
30 seconds, come on.
I am Henna Virkkunen, I'm waiting.
Hello, Commissioner. It's a lovely day, isn't it? No, look, I'd say don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. The regulatory framework has worked very nicely. It needs tweaking. It needs a few bold ideas. We need to understand that access is more important than ever if we are going to push consolidation, more than ever, because that's the trade-off. You can't have both. I don't think that's right. We should be realistic with what we can achieve with spectrum policy, and we should think about really trying to possibly even emulate what the energy sector does and allowing a percentage of spare capacity available for trans-European traffic. Because if that occurs, then we might actually get what we keep on talking about but keep on failing to do, which is to get European-level markets in some form of telecommunications.
Okay. Thank you. Great. Romain, 30 seconds. I'm seeing the seconds now, so I'm going to stop you.
So, I would say that Internet should not only become a distribution channel for a handful of global players, and unfortunately this is where we're heading, with investment actually being captured by this player from operators, and then And actually, we need this investment in coverage of rural area, in sovereignty, resilience, cybersecurity, and so on. And so the DNA is actually the opportunity to fix this issue. And for that, we need to put in place a framework to allow for fair negotiation between telecom operators and the service players.
5 seconds. Great. Thank you very much. Dalia, you up.
Dear Commissioner, I would say keep the ex-ante regulatory framework and avoid any shift toward concentration. Our SMEs are the backbone of European economy, and we don't need a few European champions in the telco sector, which has been successful for the last decades. And second point, we must say no to traffic discrimination, no traffic metering and pay-per-use. So preserve net neutrality because it's a toolbox to protect and guarantee other fundamental rights.
Thank you very much. Thomas, you're up.
Dear Commissioner, great to see you again. I have to tell you, you're being lied to. Everyone outside the bubble sees this, and you don't want to be laughed at like Mr. Breton. This is really not standing up to scrutiny. A BA in engineering or economy suffices to see that. Please don't take away rights from people. They will not like their freedom of choice being reduced or their prices going up. Competition is what actually made European telecoms great. It's stupid not to learn from your mistakes. It's even stupider not to learn from your successes. And you will be compared to Donald Trump if you open up the open internet regulation.
Okay, thank you very much. And then in this note of being compared to Donald Trump and Thierry Breton, I'm sure she would love that. We are taking a short 15 minutes coffee break, and we reconvene right here in 15 minutes for the third panel.
Thank you very much. Thank you for coming back to this third panel about how do we get a DNA that delivers for Europeans. And here in my hand, I have a tablet where you can ask your questions on Slido. Please make your questions short. It's easier for me to read and to ask them later on. You can ask questions on Slido through the QR code on the windows with the hashtag digital networks. And on this panel, we're going to discuss how do we get a DNA that delivers for Europeans. In order to answer these questions, I have Benoit Felten, Managing Director of Fiber Revolution, Peter Stuckmann, Head of Unit Electronics Communication Policy Implementation and Enforcement at the DG Connect at the European Commission, Claudio Teixeira, Senior Legal Office Digital Policy at the European Consumer Organization, BEUC, Pinar Sedengenci, Regulation and Competition Affairs Directors at the Lobby of Alternative Operators, ECTA, and Thomas Yakimavicius, Director of European Affairs at Microsoft. I'm going to start with introductory questions, 2 minutes each. Starting with you, Benoit, which has the Herculean task to sum up for us the report you are publishing today and the main findings on the sector.
Okay, so let's go. So basically what this report is about understanding the narrative that has prevailed in the whole DNA cycle that we've been through for the last year and trying to see how accurate that narrative is compared to market realities. So the narrative that we've been hearing, and we heard it again on the last panel, is that Europe is lagging behind in connectivity, that telecom operators are suffering due to the investment burden of FTTP and 5G in the last 10 years, that content providers are pushing exponential amounts of traffic onto the telecom networks, and that therefore the telcos will not be able to keep investing in order to address the coverage and the traffic growth. If we take these one by one, what we find is that, first of all, in the Commission's own analysis, Europe is not lagging behind. The targets in the latest state of the digital decade is that the 5G target of 100% will be met, and the VHCN target will be missed by a small amount. 94% is the current estimate. What we find as well is that some EU countries are very comparable to the best Asian countries, others are not. So what this suggests is that there is no systemic issue with EU regulation. There are country-specific issues. I don't want to point the finger, but clearly Germany and Italy and Poland to some extent are the largest that have some issues associated with them. The second bit on the fact that the telecom operators are suffering, we find this no longer to be true. If it was true, CapEx is going down. Peak CapEx has been passed by a large number of telecom operators in Europe, and they are all very openly broadcasting this to their own shareholders. OPEX is also going down through combination of AI implementation, more state-of-the-art networks being deployed that are more easily manageable, and reductions in headcounts. And ARPU is actually going up with an increasing focus not on deployment and adoption, but actually on upselling. So with all of this, we see that every financial analyst out there looks at free cash flow as going up significantly in the next few years. So we find that this story that, you know, they are suffering, and in some instances, we've heard some of their CEOs say that they were threatened of dying. We find that not to be true. The third thing is the traffic growth story. So I'm sure you all know what an exponential curve is, and I can tell you that traffic growth curve is nothing like an exponential curve. What we see is that the growth of traffic, the speed at which traffic has been growing, has been consistently going down for the last 10 years. We are now at about 10% year-on-year growth on mobile and about 15% year-on-year growth on fixed. Obviously, different sources differ, but and actually all the projections show that by between 2027 and 2030, this will be flat. Now, it may be argued that AI, VR, all of these things will invert that curve. In our analysis, that's very unlikely to be the case. AI is going to be mostly data center to data center traffic. The end consumer to data center traffic is going to be minimal. AR and VR are not picking up. So we're not seeing any reason today to doubt the projections that within 3 to 5 years we'll be at zero growth on traffic. And finally, on this point of traffic, the cost to handle this residual traffic is very minimal. We're looking at about 1% of the usual CapEx investment to handle traffic growth. So it's not something that seems unsustainable in any way. And finally, and maybe most importantly, when we turn to investors and we look how their outlook on the European telecom sector is, it is mostly a positive outcome. They do not think that telecom operators are bad investments. They do not think that they are threatened. They think that, in fact, their financial prospects are improving. They are all rated positively, with a few exceptions. So yeah, TIM is not the right example to look at for sure, but you know, if you take most of the large European operators, they have very good ratings, and they are very comparable to non-European operators. So there's no significant difference there. So what we find is that the 4 pillars of this narrative that led to the regulation needs to radically change in order to address all of these problems, actually, they don't match reality. And so whatever the DNA ends up being, we caution that it should be based on what is actually factually happening in the market rather than this narrative.
Okay. It was
3 minutes,
a bit more than 2 minutes.
That was about as fast as I could make it, I'm sorry.
To sum up a report, you need a bit more, I guess. Thank you. Peter, I want to turn back to you and ask you the $1 million question. With the DNA coming up in 2 months, will we have new legal aims in the statements of objectives? Will the Commission pursue new objectives?
Thanks a lot, Stefan. Thanks a lot for having me. So yeah, unfortunately, I know the expectations are very high, but I can't reveal the draft and say what's in the DNA as such. So it's, of course, ongoing work. So let's indeed think a bit about the objectives, why we're doing this, and that maybe links also a bit to what Benoit just introduced. And then maybe some thoughts on the elements. Maybe it's not about only narrative and labeling and on objectives, but also what we need to put in to have an impact and to improve the situation. So I think when you look at the current Commission, certainly 2 things stick out. We have the competitiveness compass. So DNA is, of course, an initiative that's embedded there. So you can expect, of course, that in terms of competitiveness, we want DNA to have an impact on the sector, to be able to innovate, but also deliver for the industry at large and for citizens and consumers. So that's evident. And then the other one that is maybe linking to something that is also a bit new, because maybe we can also talk a bit about the changing situation geopolitically and so on, is of course the resilience, and it was also already mentioned in the first panel. This is certainly also an objective to have in mind, that our networks are resilient. The Polish presidency has adopted a piece this year on how the world is changing and how we have to adapt our networks. So I think this, in terms of objectives, probably you could have in mind how they will appear at the end in the actual law. We will have to see. But then maybe focus a bit on the ingredients. Also there, I won't, of course, share what exactly will be exact solutions here. But indeed, I mean, what we have in mind, and this was also flagged a bit in the white paper, when you think about competitiveness, we see technology ecosystem changing. So that was in the first panel, I think, also some flavor of consensus that in principle ecosystems are extending. Partnerships are emerging, so networks moving towards cloud, enabling AI, using AI. So this is, of course, gives in principle the opportunity to modernize and to see if the framework as such is fit for purpose. And then we can maybe link it a bit to looking at internet ecosystem, looking at telecoms, which are more national as a market. We can ask ourselves the question on the single market, which came a bit from the latter report. Huh? And that could be also, and I think it came out from the first panel quite nicely from all, to say we could agree that this could be an answer to the level playing field discussion. When you say we want to make the life simpler, telcos are today indeed regulated more by the member states, so national fragmented, while the internet ecosystem is more like a country of origin in the content world or a country of establishment for platforms, let's say. So here, if we make life easier, we move to a single market as much as possible and then have the telcos operators in a similar system, that could certainly be a good answer also to what you call level playing field, or players having the same opportunities to innovate, to shape the digital services of the future. And then on that basis, then we can also look into cooperation. That was also flagged in the first panel, to find the right way how partnerships can emerge and players are smoothly cooperating. Then, of course, when we say simplification, making life easier for the telcos, point taken from this morning, indeed, we want to also simplify for everyone. So the ecosystem is enlarging. So whatever we can do also to simplify for all players affected, that is certainly something we do, area by area, where we'll try to simplify things. And then what I also like from the first panel was this future-proof aspect, to set something here that is broad enough in scope, maybe not let's say, creating constraints by setting rules that are too rigid and that can't adapt, but also then having, like in the area of cooperation, an approach where, in principle, this can evolve and new questions can be discussed in the context of cooperation. I think that's could be also an interesting approach. Another point maybe to pick up, to conclude, resilience, to come back on that. So the resilience by design was interesting this morning, because being reactive, say we have crisis, we react. Yes, we did a good job. We preserved connectivity and so on. But ideally, and this is maybe the spirit of the Minister report on preparedness, more in a defense context, but also a bit broader, that we are ready. Like we have, in principle, the member states, of course, looking into that, but also having a bit of a holistic approach in the EU. And there was also the interlinkage of traffic flows beyond borders that was mentioned this morning, interesting point. And of course, then also to have the governance structure, how this holistic approach to something that is, of course, primarily national. When you come to security and resilience, how we can organize ourselves in Europe so that we prepared for the future. So this is a bit what would be maybe taking a bit the change and what could be as new elements that we want to bring in.
I see. Thank you very much. Maybe building on that and coming to you, Claudio, do you see this importance around competitiveness, resiliency, making sure that critical infrastructure is secured, simplifying rules and going towards a single market, as said, following l'État, will be positive for end users?
First of all, thank you so much for the invitation, and it's a great opportunity to be here on behalf of BILC, of the European Consumer Organization. We have a very high stake in this. We represent 44 consumer organizations in 31 countries. And our members are basically, they work on the ground and address a lot of the issues that arise from European regulation, how they translate on the ground, and the actual effects they have on consumers and specific consumer harm. And I think I'm not exaggerating here when I say that it's a pretty big stake when telecoms repeatedly are the #1 sector on consumer complaints. And the issues are pretty much actually identified in terms of the issues that consumers face. So this is something which we have indeed quite the experience. How to address these issues. So of course, from our side, we always welcome any possibility there is to improve the rules, any opportunity that the Commission gives to actually have a reflection on how things can be changed to the better. Looking at how the debate has been so far the last years, I don't think it's going to be any surprise to any in the room when I tell that I think essentially a lot of the concerns we've been raising over the past years and still today have been fundamentally not yet addressed. We are really looking forward to see what the digital networks that can bring also for consumers, because I think, and point taken from Peter, that probably that was not the point of it or the place of it. Although I do wonder where would it be of the white paper. But indeed, looking at the white paper, which is what we have, it was no surprise that from our side to express our discontent that there's basically no consumer angle in there, or at least no recognition of the challenges consumers face today. We do see a lot of emphasis in these terms, and that you just said, Theo, but at the same time, I have to say, it's very important not to be caught in semantics. It really is important to determine what actually those words mean. And unfortunately, we see that in the current context, for different people, it means different things. Normally, that's the sign of a healthy debate, but when it comes to policy making, we are very much concerned that these terms are being used in a way that don't really, to us, represent probably the accurate concerns that consumers today do. When we speak about competitiveness, for instance, let's break it down. For us, competition is competitiveness. Fair competition in the telecoms market. I mean, the liberalization of the telecoms market has been a huge success from a consumer point of view. For us, if we want more competitive companies, disruptive, innovative, providing the services that consumers want, fighting for the attention and the consideration of their customer, you need to have healthy competition. Otherwise, there can be no competitiveness. So it's a bit concerning for us to see how we're somehow trying to square the circle here and try to say in Letta and Draghi that somehow the solution to that seems to be empowering those who already are quite big. And to us, in a zero-sum game and not that much, this has to come at the expense of someone. So, okay, we want to consolidate a few. But what are you prepared to sacrifice for that? Are you prepared to sacrifice consumers? Are we going to jump the prices on them? Are you going to sacrifice alternative operators? Well, right now, take any survey you want. Most recent surveys from our members show, the most recent one in Spain, consumers are actually most satisfied precisely with alternative operators rather than incumbents. Are we going to sacrifice that? When we're talking about security and resilience, we seem to be focused on, let's give these operators the means to invest more and create better infrastructures. Well, the way we see it, resilience is through redundancy. We need different networks. We need different operators competing. We cannot create dependencies on just one cable, one operator, one network. To have different infrastructure owned by different companies that compete amongst each other, that creates in itself redundancy. That creates in itself not just security and resilience, but it also creates competition and consumer welfare. So if we want to go down this line, to us, these terms are quite well established. This is a market where competition and consumer welfare go hand in hand, and the correlation is clear. So from our perspective, it is fundamental that markets stay that way, and that any intervention down the line to indeed increase investment, empower operators to make changes, you name it, that's all very well and nice, but we need to make sure that when we're simplifying rules or harmonizing rules. We don't deregulate, and we don't actually make it easier to those who already have a lot and not so easy for those who have little, because we can say, oh, let's just take care of some rules here and there, but we need to be honest when we tell people that if we do remove certain rules, the burden that you're alleviating of some is not the same. It's not proportional. And sometimes it can be actually counterproductive, because a lot of these rules, including consumer rights, sector-specific consumer rights and telecoms, they're there not to be a regulatory burden on companies. They're there to provide a level playing field to ensure that there is an incentive for operators, to stay honest, to provide better services, and to compete for their customers on the basis of quality and innovation of their offers, not just because they're the only guy in town. So it's very important that we keep not just the semantics, but to actually boil down what these terms actually mean and make sure we have rules that empower everyone and not just a very few.
And building on what you just said, that the white paper was not an exercise on consumer rights, I want to ask a similar question to Pinar. Yesterday, Deputy Director General for DG Connect, Renato Nicolai, was in this room in a panel here and said, don't worry, the level of ambition of the Commission on the DNA is very high, and there will be, and I quote, huge opportunities for everyone. So maybe the white paper was also, looking at managing infrastructure, but not so much on competition per se. So I want to turn to you, Pinar, and ask you, do you think there will be in the DNA, or there is a chance to be a right balance between incumbent and alternative operators?
Thank you so much, first of all, for the invite. And I would immediately say we really do hope so, because what we observe, and this is not only something that is told by the European Competitive Operators Association, but this is solid science, I would say, that the best market outcomes are coming from effective competition. And innovation and investments are also coming from effective competition in general, but even the more in this sector, which is a sector based on subscription. So that means that if there is only one or two in the market, in any case, the end users that Claudio represents here will continue to subscribe to the services because they are obliged to, because we are using those services each day. So when the innovation and investment will come, when there will be competitive pressure. That is why, for replying to your question, I would say that the investment incentives of both types of operators, be it alternative and not only incumbent, should take to be into utmost account when there is an objective to make a regulatory reform. And what we have seen in these years, and then of course we can enter into the details of study greatly made by Benoit, we see a success story. We see a success story on many lines. So first of all, we see a success story in terms of market outcomes for diversity, for affordability, for the end users, for innovative offers for the end users in Europe. Today, the European users are very lucky because if you look at the United States, you can find a horrible situation when it comes to the affordability, and also when it comes, I would say, with respect to the investments in FTTH infrastructure, which please remember that it's the real future-proof infrastructure. When we are looking at the investments, I would also like to agree with Benoit. We see that investments, we have nothing to be jealous with respect to the United States, because we see that also in the reports made by the Incumbents Association, we see that there are higher levels of investments and higher levels of deployment rates when it comes to FTTH infrastructure in Europe with respect to the United States, that we are, there was this trend of saying, wow, there is a very nice and the grass is greener. Then, when it comes to the ex-ante framework, we really believe that this is the core pillar of the European regulatory framework. which we should be proud of it. And we should have to focus on our success stories rather than changing it for good. Why it is so good? Because it is designed in order to to auto-destruct himself. Let's think about how does it work in the European framework. If you have a competition problem, which is well proven, evidence-based by the national regulatory authority, okay, you have the regulation in that market. If it's not proved on the basis of evidence and data, none of the national regulatory authorities can regulate that market. In that sense, it's auto-destroying itself. Why? Because if it's an effective competition, it will disappear because it's based on competition law principles. It is universal, it is timeless, and it's technology neutral. That is why we really believe that we have to stick to our core economic principle, which is in the regulatory framework. And I would say, please do not touch something that works well.
Okay, thank you. And Thomas, I wanted to ask you, as the Commission's white paper is really looking forward, saying engineering stuff that I'm not able to challenge myself because I'm not an engineer, is they talk a lot about this telecom cloud continuum. So I wanted to ask you, did the Commission rightly identify this newest tech evolution? Because I know telecom operators are thinking about creating very small data centers close to the user for very low latency services called edge cloud. They are also part of the AI gigafactories project to build AI training hubs. They also sell cloud services. So there's a lot of things happening in this market. So my question to you is, do you see this telecom cloud continuum happening?
Thank you so much, and pleasure being here. I'd like to share Microsoft's perspective as well as a global provider who has been in Europe for over 40 years. So we've been very closely observing and participating in the internet ecosystem on the European end throughout the years, and increasingly more so. And it's only encouraging to see that there is so much investment in the infrastructure part of the ecosystem, and we've been also heavily investing in that part. You might have heard about our own commitments, what we're aiming to achieve over the next couple of years, increasing our capacity on the European end, establishing close to 200 data centers across the region, increasing our capacity for that exact purpose, to serve that growing demand. And I think, to answer your question, I think it's only encouraging to see that many more players in the ecosystem are realizing the business value in investing in that part of the ecosystem, and realizing that that's where the demand is growing. And I think there's plenty of opportunities to take on in that market space. Now, when it comes to the DNA, now that you refer to what the European Commission is about to propose, I would like to highlight maybe three things. One is that, and that probably sums up the previous panel, let's not create solutions for the problems that do not exist, to rephrase what Pinar has mentioned before. And I think Europe is really on a successful path, and we really need to see, as this panel is titled, how DNA can truly deliver to Europeans. We really need to see what are the measures that would make it an efficient framework. And I couldn't agree more. I think everyone agrees across the board that making the rules more efficient, looking at areas where we need to simplify are probably the right directions that we need to go to. And then also incentivizing those investment conducive environments that would actually allow to further and deeper invest into the cloud networks, into last mile networks, into subsea cable infrastructure. And I think what market shows that it actually works well. We have that truly collaborative cross-industry participants model where market-driven investments actually show how this collaboration is thriving. And I can just tell you by example what you mentioned as well. Yes, we do have partnerships with many telecom operators across Europe. I'm not sure about the exact numbers, but globally we have over 20,000 IMP interconnection arrangements, and many of those are in Europe. And we have strategic partnerships with European telco operators where we also invest together in cloud infrastructure and subsea cable infrastructure, helping to boost the capacity of the overall internet ecosystem, so to serve that demand, because the demand is growing. And I think there are many examples that are showcasing how different sides of the ecosystem are finding ways to collaborate and finding innovative business approaches. Because I think that's the gist. That's where we need to focus on how to ensure that this forthcoming regulatory framework would incentivize new business models, would create these investment conducive conditions, so players, be they well-established or newly emerging, would be able to thrive and actually invest and play in this market together.
Thank you. So, as you just said, I'm going to use the same sentence you just said. Don't fix problems that don't exist. So let's talk about the problem that exists. Let's start with two. One is take-up. Although the fiber deployment is quite good in Europe, take-up is still slow. And the second is 5G. Of course, 5G deployment is almost ubiquitous in Europe, but 5G standalone is lagging behind. So shooting it to you, Peter, what do you have in the DNA in order to fix these specific problems?
Yeah, I think maybe also coming back to some points here on lagging behind or not, I think the picture is mixed, especially on the fixed side. So I think some member states are impressively advanced in fiber, some others not. We have agreed on the target 2030, 100% fiber in principle, so that together with Council and Parliament, so this should be something that we should have in mind. And of course there we have also then the take-up question, and you can also think about how we manage the transition from copper to fiber to facilitate also then switching to that technology without having disadvantages as a consumer, without lowering competition. So that will be certainly a very interesting piece to look at in this transition from copper to fiber, which will, I think, be very instrumental for the take-up question. Because normally users are also not, demand is coming sometimes a bit later also on the consumer side. So then you have a new connectivity and then you discover the opportunities. So that's a bit the issue that we have in this kind of infrastructure business, that we see infrastructures being built and the demand is coming gradually. On the mobile side, I think we also can see a mixed picture. So on the one hand, what is impressive with 5G in Europe, globally also, that the adoption of the technology was unprecedented compared to previous generation, that we kicked it off as we wanted around 2020. And we have now basic 5G almost everywhere, which that is part of the good news. That was also in the Digital Decade report. And then the question, as you mentioned, it depends a bit how you look at it. I mean, because as a consumer, but also on the industry side, we don't see yet the new opportunities, the new business that we were, why the sector was investing this in R&D over many years. That doesn't mean that it doesn't come. I mean, these markets, when you talk about vertical markets, for example, new services, we talked about slicing in the previous panels, is not something that you just switch on. Okay, 5G standalone, probably you have to switch on. We can discuss a bit what does it mean in terms of investment and cost. But then the market as such is not like a consumer market. You have more, in the business environment, more go-to market. You have actually, as a telco, have to work with the different verticals, with the sector, and accompanying them, what can be offered to them, what are the new features, and develop these ecosystems together. We also did that even in in a broader ecosystem, like in automotive and rail, for example, they have also public dimension. So we try to bring together players in this deployment projects. So I think this is something that will be gradually moving. It's not that you switch it on, the verticals are lined up and buying it. So it's a different approach to business also in this B2B segment. So yeah, overall, the conclusion would be on the 5G side, I think that on the high end, compared to other regions, we are not as advanced as we would like to be as a leading industry region, because we have the strength in Europe to have strong industry, and in principle, the take-up should be really, we should build on that.
Issue, right? Telecom operators are saying if we don't have 5G slicing, industries won't be automated, and then we will lose out against China and the US, and then it's an industry problem.
Well, I think it's of course the question to build these ecosystems, to build the lead markets, and slicing is maybe some instrument. It's maybe not the answer to everything, but when you talk about offering quality with your networks, slicing is of course a concept that has been invested a lot in, and at least I think one panelist said this morning, let's allow it, let's create the opportunity here. And then, of course, if it's taken up or not, might depend a bit on the case. Maybe a final point also on from Claudio, so the consumer or citizen side. So I think we can be very clear that this objective end user benefits will be also very high in the DNA, will remain. If you look at the DNA in the code today as it's put, it's not so much focused on consumers. Of course, the end users include consumers. But at the end, and that was I think, the spirit of the white paper a bit, and then it's okay, what is in it for me in competitiveness? I think we can't detach it. Citizens will benefit from competitiveness, will also benefit from services, even if they don't subscribe to something, for example, a smart city, a safety service. Citizens will benefit from these new services. So it's not about only the consumer dimension, while the consumer dimension we, of course, want to keep. And in that sense, competition will remain an enabling factor also for the competitiveness. I think that is without question.
I see. Turning to you, Claudio, do we need to impose copper switch off at a certain deadline? What should be the rules behind it?
I always get weary when I hear terms like impose. You know, not a good start, right? Look, from a consumer side, we get it. You know, we get it because we were the ones at a very long time ago highlighting that as the digital revolution was advancing, too many swathes of people were being left behind, either because they cannot access or they could not afford these fantastic, amazing new technologies. And to that adds a second dimension, which is the rapid, and now we promotion, incentivizing of everything going digital without ensuring appropriate safeguards for those who are neither tech savvy or simply cannot access these services. And I'm talking about essential citizenship services like e-government, like basic services that even not related to public administration are still necessary to have in a life in society. Talk about access to reliable connectivity for homeschooling for your kids, so you can, since the pandemic, so you can telework. So connectivity has indeed gained this huge dimension. This from a consumer perspective, but what we call from a citizenship perspective, in which you do rely on this connection to have access to services which are essential for life in society. So, and now we're in a context in which the Commission, I'll pull back here also to the Apply AI strategy, like the message really seems to be, no, we really need to accelerate even more. But we've been saying for a lot of years, like, hold up, what about the rest of us? What about the people who cannot access or afford it? So our fear, and is a very substantiated one, is simply that at the pace we're moving, we keep talking about the amazing benefits that are coming, and we simply keep forgetting that a vast swathe of the population still cannot even access it or understand how this can benefit them. So we need to take care of bridging the digital divide before we widen it even further under promises of sunlit uplands to come. It's very important we keep coherence and we keep some harmony in it so we don't break the social fabric. This is why the importance of sector-specific telecoms rules remaining in any possible changes, because some of these are the latest safeguards you have to ensure that these people have their basic rights. And the basic to this is not little, you know, the access to a high quality, affordable connectivity should be front and center if we're talking about bridging the investment gap, deploying more infrastructure. This is the focus we always thought was missing, is that it's not just creating more infrastructure, creating more market, deploy more infrastructure, deploy more 5G, is where do we deploy it? Who are we going to cover? And just treating this as a blank slate of artificial targets, we ignore something that, well, right now I was very happy to hear Peter saying, the fact that indeed we have countries that are super advanced, almost at 98, 99% coverage of fiber, and we have others lagging behind. And then of course we cannot look at an average EU and just say, hey, we're lagging behind because we're only at 70%. There's more to the picture. It's more fragmented than that. So the causes of this situation sometimes, if not all the time, isn't the fact that somehow we are lagging behind as a collective due to the fact that we have EU rules that are pushing us down. It's simply the fact that there are still rules which are not being enforced or applied with enough strength to ensure that the basic level playing field that was promised somewhere is delivered. And we see this a bit everywhere. We hear a lot of criticism from the industry side saying that the telecoms code should be reviewed, that consumer rights should be scrapped because these measures haven't proven themselves. The last member state to transpose the code was what, 6 months ago? So it's a bit, these rules simply haven't had the fair shot to show how effective they are. And when you do go to the ones that have started implementing it before, that had longer, you do see success stories. Here, yesterday I was at a BEREC, we were organizing an event with BEREC, BEREC joint workshop on end users' rights. And I heard a great claim from the telco side saying that consumer rights can be simplified and can be reduced because no one bothers to read a contract with 40 pages. And my reaction to that is, well, a contract with 40 pages that actually tells people what they must know before they get into a contractual relationship is better than a contract with 1 page that tells them absolutely nothing what they're signing to. And if you say, okay, contract's still too long, that's why the code got contract summaries, so people at least know what important information there is that they must know to compare offers and then eventually decide on that offer. Why? Because yeah, maybe not everyone must read 40 pages. Yeah, maybe not everyone is tech savvy or learned enough to know that. But these are the importance of the whole ensemble of protections in the code to ensure that no matter who you are, no matter what kind of situation you're in, as a consumer, you have some kind of safeguard that protects you and your situation and ensures you have basic rights of transparency, you have basic rights of having an affordable situation, universal service obligations, anyone. I hope you don't get to touch that one too much, at least not to shut it down. So these rights are there for a reason, and they're there to address the very specific situations which was identified that simply the market could not cover, cannot handle it itself to protect consumers. So the ones that have been for a long, these are working. Contract summaries, I think it's a greatest success story of end user rights. I think everyone is more or less conferred with that every day when they're trying to sign on, and it's something that consumers really rely on, and has very high approval ratings if you ask on any consumer survey. So the few things that have been well implemented in time, the feedback is very positive. So to start with the things that are working and say, let's just get rid of it, is not a sound approach. So we need to protect these essential rights for consumers, that's for sure, and we need to start thinking of ways in which, if we're really serious about bridging digital divide and increased investment, we focus on the white spots, the gray spots, and delivering options for those who cannot still afford it. A study for our German member, VCBV, and I swear I'll stop here, has shown that still 1 million households in Germany still lack appropriate connection. This is not nothing. So we need to focus on those instead of focusing on all elements, to be honest, like 5G standalone, which I think everyone should already know by now after all this debate. These are mostly industrial options. Not every consumer, home teleworking, is going to need the 5G standalone. On the 5G that matters, we are doing extremely well, and the data show it. So it really is a matter of adapting our metrics and understanding who are we going for. Are we going for the last ones to reach 100% of coverage? Those consumers in the rural areas and in the islands? those consumers who cannot afford a basic option because fiber costs 80 euros a package a month, and you have to decide between that and the food on your table for your kids. So it's like, we need to understand what the metric we're doing with. And I think for consumers, the absolute priority is you need to have a reliable commission to do your basic citizenship rights, to access e-government, to have school for your kids, to do some teleworking, and maybe have a Netflix at night. Sorry, the pro, but it's true. Or any other streaming platform you want, but you're here, so why not? This is the basic. We do not need to now tell consumers and impose them, look, to do that you should have fiber, you should have copper. I think in a context of copper switch off, we should incentivize, of course, the transition, but we also should make sure that operators have fair offers for consumers and that they're not being pushed down any particular type of technology or any type of infrastructure. But that's, again, I would say let's let the market work. I don't think we need to impose anything. I think we need to, if there's anything to impose, is making sure that operators stay honest and provide consumers with transparent offers.
Okay, thank you very much. Maybe I want your views, Pinar. Yes,
the same
on
question?
the copper switch off and the 5G standalone, as we were discussing, but very quickly because we are running out of time.
So I will just retake on what Claudio said in order to, because we mentioned a lot of times Germany, so let me just use the German case. So as alternative operators, we always have been advocating for swift copper switch off. And we also highlighted in our white paper response saying that, well, we do have, in fact, few problems. None of them are kind of dead or alive, but we have to tackle with those problems. And number one was take up, as you said, the take up of FTTH, because there are very high capexes that have been spent. And it's very important in order to be profitable, of course, that we do not keep two networks in parallel, okay? But of course, this copper switch off should be swift and pro-competitive. What do we mean by pro-competitive? There should be measures in order to avoid that the incumbents that have still an important customer base and will keep their ownership of access to physical infrastructure do not use this tool in order to foreclose or preempt the market. That is very simple. Of course, you will tell us, well, okay, but you need, of course, very detailed rules. We believe that there are already some very good rules in place in the code and in the recommendation, the recent recommendation. But we also believe that there are cases that just open our eyes. For instance, Germany. What's happening in Germany, I think it should be a kind of clamorous example in order to, together with the Commission, to reflect on what can be done and how this switch-off process should be healthily managed in a way that we have diversity of operators, big and small, that are competing, and by competing are getting benefit to the end users. In terms of affordability, innovation, and the variety of offers. Then on the 5G, I believe that on 5G, overall, we are doing great, as Commission data states. We are around 94%. And just thinking on the fact that it started in 2020, I think it's a kind of record. On 5G standalone, 5G standalone, yes, we have seen that by the proxy indicator of the Commission, which is 3.8 gigahertz use emission, we are a bit lower, but there is a big but. We have seen so far that 5G standalone use cases are business to business. So they are not, until the contrary proof from your side, they are not business to consumer. So what we see is there is a lack of demand, but will come out, as Peter said. Normally, there is the deployment, and adoption comes gradually. So no panic. We believe that it will come, and the Commission has a very nice agency and a SAFE program on that one, and we are active contributors as an association and our members, and what we see is that demand is coming out. And on the 5G, and then I will shut up, I promise. It's about the spectrum reform, okay? What we have seen so far that in some member states, there have been more temptation to cash cow the auctions rather than to go for end user benefits, for citizens and for European business benefits. That means that in the auction, instead of favoring the commitments from the operators to cover more and more, it has been the first and foremost objective to make cash for the state budget. We would like to see something very different. There are best practices. We do not have to go and discover United States of America again. We have, for instance, a French model, which is wonderful because which favors the competition. For instance, the one on 3.4, 3.8 gigahertz allocation, because it gives an appropriate portion of spectrum to all players in the market, which, as today, are 4. And at the same time, it also accepts very strong commitments of coverage. Today, if we see the latest data from EDAT, which was released, it was a report for the European Commission in the CEF conference, we see that for 5G overall, we are doing great, and we have some issues at the rural coverage. So let's use the best cases in order to go towards an improvement for all European member states in a way that no one is lagging behind, and in a way that we touch only surgically, what is really, really a problem, and to keep what is our point of strength.
Thank you very much. I would like to come to another discussion, which is another failure, so to say. Maybe not. Maybe it's not a failure. Maybe it's more of history. Member states historically never really wanted to have a pan-European telecom market, and I think this has been underlined by Letta and Draghi quite well. We still have 27 telecom markets. So I know here most of you agree on the fact that there shouldn't be national mergers inside national markets. But then I would like to ask you the million-dollar question. What other methodologies should we use in order to get to a pan-European market? Because this would be possible, especially in a union so proud of an internal market. Starting with you, Benoit.
Okay, so I don't quite know what we mean by a pan-European market, right? If we mean by that...
You make it with 3-4 operators, I guess.
Well, but exactly, but I'm not sure that's what should be defined as a pan-European market. Nothing stops anyone from doing that today, right? The reason it is not happening...
It's also true that those who tried didn't manage to realize it.
No. Those who tried realized that telecom infrastructure is local, and that the economies of scale that you can build at the infrastructure level are virtually non-existent. In other words, just because you know how to manage a network in rural France does not mean you can manage a network in rural Czechoslovakia. The economies of scale are just not there, right? At the service level, there are plenty of economies of scale. At the infrastructure level, there are not. So one model, and I realize this is very provocative of me to say, but one model that would deliver a pan-European market would be to have independence between the network assets and the service layer, and the service layer could then deploy everywhere, but you would have independent networks everywhere. But that's not 4 players nationally. So that's why I'm saying we need to be careful what we mean when we say that we want a pan-European network. Now, having said that, are there differences in regulation that complicate life for people who want to invest transnationally? Probably. But I think the economic question offsets that immediately. In other words, it's just not profitable to do that. And actually, if we compare ourselves to other democracies, and I use the term a little cautiously when talking about the US, but if we compare ourselves to other democracies, we see that there are no transnational networks, right? AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile, they are local, very big, but local companies that have carved out the national network amongst themselves. So Yeah, I don't think there is a problem there unless the goal is not to deploy transnational services for European citizens, but rather to create transnational behemoths that we think can be the carriers of the European torch globally. But that's a completely different goal.
In letters,
but that's my point. That's a completely different goal.
Ask you a question.
And if you give me 5 seconds more, I wanted to come back to this notion of competitiveness versus competition. Competitiveness, as I understand it, is giving the ability to European business to shine globally. And I think it's a very important point of policy. I also think that there is a reason why there are no global telecom operators. NTT is not global, AT&T is not global, Orange is not global. The reason is the core business of a telecom operator is to operate where it has a network. And no one has a global network. If you want to operate on the global stage, you need to operate at a higher layer of services so that you are network agnostic. So policy should not, in my opinion, focus on trying to prop up European telecom giants because they will not shine globally. If our goal is to shine globally, we should prop up European service businesses that can expand globally. And there are many good candidates for that, but I don't get the sense that policy is actually focusing on these guys.
I see. I'm going to ask to answer quickly as well, Pinar and Claudio. Maybe I would like your views on this Italian non-paper who's suggesting to reduce specifically the EU caps of roaming. And in their view, by doing that, there would be an incentive for mobile, not fixed, mobile operators to compete at the pan-European level. That's the view, that's what they sent to the Commission to put in a non-paper. So I'd like to have your views. Do you think it's a right way and a way that would deliver for Europeans to allow this and take this regulatory step?
Yeah. Okay, I believe that we have to look at the two different segments of the telecommunications market in order to understand whether there is a scope for a pan-European market, okay, whatever it means. But I do not intend, of course, we are talking about 3-4 very big players that are playing. No, I'm talking about the consumers, be it end users, so families and individuals, be it businesses. So if we look at part of the business-to-business, okay, market, then we see that we already have pan-European operators. And those pan-European operators are already active in the market since more than 15, 20 years, okay? Maybe they changed their names in time, but they are still there, alive, and they are profitably operating among us. I tell you because we have some of them inside in the association, so you know them. For once is Colt Communications. They are proudly operating in whole Europe and also in the whole world, but in whole Europe. And they also kind of hurt sometimes when someone says, yeah, but there is no single European market. And they say, no, but we are representing the single European market, okay? Another one is Transatel. It's always business to business, so be careful. So this is business to business market. And what they are asking for is to have less burdens, okay? Less burdens meaning that if you have to operate within 27 member states, you don't want to see, in order to get the authorization, with a list of million items to comply with, and to go to a national lawyer in order to be able to submit your authorization declaration, okay? They do not want to see this. And the current code, has already had a very good basis because the provisions are there in order not to have this situation. But unfortunately, there has been golden plating once again, okay? This is a problem that we hope that the Commission with DNA will solve finally, okay? Just an example. But just to tell you, in the business-to-business market, in our opinion, there is already an European internal market, and we don't have to have three giants that are operating everywhere. And okay, on business to consumer, and I'm coming here.
We need to finish.
Okay, sorry.
Yes.
Business to business, business to consumer market, fixed and mobile. Okay, so for me, the markets are national. Sorry if I'm saying something scandalous. Of course, this is my personal opinion now. We believe that the markets are national because we also have shown in our response here to the white paper that we have totally different socioeconomic conditions, economic indicators, financial conditions, cultures and languages, okay? So we believe that there is a reason why, okay, there is no pan-European provision of services. And we do not believe that by making a measure on the mobile, you would magically get the pan-European market. So to your question.
Enrico Letta was dreaming of one number for all Europeans. Your view very quickly, and then I have a last round of questions.
Just to say here, and this is precisely also what BEREC said in their reply to public consultation, saying that there is no regulatory obstacles at this point that prevent operators to precisely go cross-border. It's not a regulatory issue, it's indeed a cultural market issue. But it didn't have to be. And this is precisely what we've said. From the very long time, BILC has been arguing for a single market that actually delivers for consumers. The problem is that this top-down approach, again, imposing, has always been starting with companies first. You need to create a market, you need to create demand before you start saying, oh, let's go down to three major operators. Because as you said, indeed, if you ask Letta and Draghi, that's what they said their reports meant. Oh, we need to come down from 130. They even said, no, it was first we have to come down just to 30, then it was just 5, then it was just, well, this is no longer industrial policy. This is a bit, again, I think we're imposing too much here. So the consideration that, somehow we should just, I'm sorry the expression, but get rid of European companies on an artificial whim is like probably not the best case to attract business and investment, right? But just saying it out there. But for consumers, we've always said we need to create a demand, and this is why I've always been very passionate about the need for the roaming reform, for free roaming. This has always been a huge consumer demand. We've achieved that, and we saw how indeed that responded to a market demand, and that created a market for that. How the traffic exploded on use of mobile data, cross-border calls, everything. The market was created by that. So regulatory conditions can indeed, more rules not less, can create more investment, more market, more opportunities, and better offers for consumers. And we said the same thing again when it happened to intra-EU calls, what we call international calls. And with the Gigabit Infrastructure Act, we finally got to see some action on that. Let's see by 2029 what we get in the end. But again, this is another reflection of how, if we are an internal market, why are we still paying to call from a Portuguese SIM number to a Belgian SIM card? It makes absolutely no sense. So we have to start with the small things. You need to create the market to ensure that we can have then demand, and then we can have operators that reply to that demand. And looking ahead, if we do want to start creating that market, then we should listen to those who create that demand. We need to listen to consumers, and we need to listen to what they need, what they want. It's this paradigm we need to shift, because otherwise we're going to be stuck in this limbo in which if we just listen to what the big operators want, I'm sorry to tell you, this is not how we're going to reach the single market. And I can tell you a quick example. Guess who was actually opposed to an ambitious reform on roaming? Guess who was actually, still is, opposed to getting rid of surcharges on intra-EU calls? Precisely the major telecom operators. So, I'm sorry, you cannot have your cake and eat it. You cannot have an argumentation saying that you want a single market for businesses, but at the same time denying it of your customers, of your consumers. So if we're going to go down that way, we need to have a single market that works for everyone, and we need to start with the basis of it all, who creates the demand, who creates the offers. We need to start with the customers, and then let the market work.
Thank you, and I'm going to ask you for closing remarks. I think you were watching the second panel. I'm going to ask you the same question. you work in a new institution, you are now on Henna Verkunen, you have 30 seconds. I'm looking at the seconds, really, we need to stop. What do you say? Peter, I will have a different question for you, I guess.
Messages.
I think here, as we are so close.
Of a customer angle, of course.
From a customer angle, well, you know, Microsoft's mission, as simple as it may sound, it is very grand. It is to empower every person and every organization on the planet to achieve more. I think if we want to apply that same mission statement to EU regulatory frameworks and the revisions of those frameworks, we need to aim for achieving more in terms of creating more investment conducive conditions, simplified and streamlined procedures so businesses could grow and so that the ecosystem could thrive as well. And I think, again, I've mentioned this at the very beginning, I'll mention this again. Let's not create solutions for the problems that do not exist. Let's focus on forward-looking regulatory policy approaches that would help this continent to thrive in the coming decade.
It's a very nice elevator pitch. Don't fix problems that don't exist. Okay. Pinar, you're up. 30 seconds.
Okay. If you want to have more competitiveness, please keep the effective competition. And in order to keep the effective competition, please keep the main pillar of the European regulatory framework, which is SMP-based ex-ante regulation. Don't fix something which is not broken. So the same message, I think.
So let's not fix the problems that don't exist. I would argue, let's fix the problems that do exist, and there are plenty. There is a massive trend already going on. It's not the solution you're advocating for, it's the trends already going on for consolidation and concentration at the European market. I think we all saw the news that happened yesterday in France. This trend has been going on for a couple of 5 years, and the trend for more consolidation hasn't been increasing investment, hasn't been lowering the prices for consumers, hasn't been improving offers, definitely hasn't been creating cross-border giants. Last time I checked, alternate operators apparently are the ones that are actually going into the markets and becoming a fourth operator and creating more, better offers for consumers. So I would say let's make sure that the problems of today do not become the solution of tomorrow. Because if we're going down this road, more concentration, more consolidation, more betting on the same horse that is delivering us so many consumer complaints at this point, you wouldn't believe it. This is not the right approach. Let's make sure we keep rules that ensure level playing field for all operators to thrive and decide what consumers want, not dictate what they should have.
Okay, thank you very much. Benoit?
So I think what I would say would start with take the doom and gloom glasses off. There are a lot of European successes. Build on those successes. And if, in particular, the long-term goal is to shape industrial policy to a direction in which there are more global giants that are European tech companies, then start looking at the ones that can become these giants, rather than try to artificially prop up companies that cannot.
Okay. And Peter, maybe slightly different approach. You're going back to the Commission in 10 minutes. You see the Commission.
First I will ask which job I should do, but of course if she would ask me for advice, well, I think also maybe coming back to some of the points here. I mean, on the one hand, let's look at some low-hanging fruits, simplify certain things so we can have immediate impact. But then let's not shy away from also the mid or long-term perspective to really set conditions that could lead to a single market. I think it's not about forcing a single market tomorrow, like by being very interventionist, imposing obligations, but rather creating opportunities. I think that's probably also then a quite pragmatic approach that we, in principle, say we don't want to force structures, we don't want to force players to go in a certain direction, but having, easing their life, simplifying, getting the resources, following best practices like Spectrum, and not shying then away from these quite sensitive topics, quite ambitious topics, and then also keep keep them on and follow through on these important ingredients, let's say, that will have the real impact.
Okay, thank you very much. So we've finished the panel, but we still have Daniel Friedlander, CCI Europe Head of Office, for a few concluding remarks. I think you are set to go on the here. So I'm going to ask you to go step over the stage. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there water? Ooh. I'll be very short. I love your speed dating with the commissioner thing, and I think we should do that regularly, including actually when we meet the commissioner. Very short pitches, and then we discuss. But thank you all for coming. It's really nice to see a full house, good discussion. I think that days like today are some of the most open debates, discussions on these issues that we've seen. I think we have seen convergence from many different people on a lot of agreements, which were very indicative, especially, I think, in the concluding remarks always. So as the one who gets to say thank you to everyone for coming, for being online, thank you to Maria Teresa, Casper, Euractiv, all of our speakers. I really want to say thank you. We will continue in just a moment for lunch. But let's be clear, these are very important discussions. The reason we keep doing this, and now I've been working on this again this time for 5 years, but I remember 20 years ago working on it. I remember 10 years ago working on it. We heard about it a little bit today. The discussions have come up. The debates have come up. The arguments have been discounted, and yet we keep coming back. So my concluding remarks would be very simple in that we still don't see the need to be focusing on the solutions for non-existent problems. We heard that now. We have so many things we could be working on. I was fascinated to hear again about the idea of structural separation, focusing on the intra-EU calls. These are very interesting debates that we could be having, supporting the European companies that are really doing well and the competitive sector. Really positive things that we can work on. Things that even on the tech side from our membership we would love to work on to empower, because a lot of the companies that are doing well have been built up over the years in partnership with a lot of the tech companies, including non-European ones, and those are positive stories. What I liked, I think, from one of the panels was just this warning that the DNA could destroy the progress of the last 20 years, you know, if you sort of push towards an oligopoly model, or this idea almost that the only way Europe can work is if you have some telco almost cartel, which is crazy. So I will be a tiny bit provocative in my last minute here. But before that, I also want to thank those who we invited and who came, who have the very different points of view, who are more representing the telco incumbent points of view, because we invited all of them. All of them. They never invite us, we invited all of them. Very few came, so I really want to thank those who came who really don't agree. We want the most open possible debate, because that's how you actually get to solutions. So that's why we will really invite anyone who wants to debate, and we will continue to do that. So really thank you. A few of the highlights that I want to talk about is just from panel one. There is no convergence between telecom companies and cloud providers, CDNs. There just isn't. What there is collaboration, and that collaboration is a system that works. And again, if we want a simplification agenda, if we want a competitive Europe, don't break something that works and where companies are distinct, different in their applications, in their work. Let's just, if we can agree on some very simple principles that if things work and you have evidence that it works and no evidence that it doesn't, don't touch it. Being part of the same ecosystem does not mean the same rules apply. It's the same if you look at any other sectors. They work together, but they are distinct. I will just stop there on panel one. On panel two, lipstick on a pig is still a pig. I hope I can still say that. A dispute resolution mechanism is still a network fee. Europe has committed to not doing network fees. Can we take that statement seriously? Can we trust when we are told bluntly, repeatedly, publicly? I certainly hope so. If not, well, the whole ecosystem will suffer, and we've heard again, there's no problem. Again, we've also heard settlement-free peering is the norm, and it works. Let's not break it. Panel 3, very quickly, and it was a great way to end. Competition does deliver, and there are alternatives. You don't just need a few big ones. You don't just need to artificially top-down try to do things. And I know that there are lots of discussions on industrial policy, and sometimes we agree with them, sometimes we don't, that's okay. But there needs to be a reason behind it, and it actually needs to be a consistent rationale from our institutions and our leaders. You can't say one thing for some sectors and completely the opposite for other sectors. That just doesn't make sense. I loved the point about creating demand because we've been saying it forever. I used to say it in my old job working for the content sectors, create the demand. And the consumers are the ones who then take up that demand, who pay the subscriptions, who are super consumers like me, who pay a fortune for all kinds of crazy connectivity. And that's how you can also grow. It is an ecosystem that works, and we have too much at stake to sort of artificially create problems. We have not seen the AI boom that causes massive new growth on usage. Things are growing about, as we say, and Benoit, I think, who's still here, has a new study that looks at a lot of things as well. I would urge you to pick it up. There are a few extra explainers that for some reason weren't put in your little goodie bags here. They're just on the yellow block at the exit. Please also take them. There's a lot of good information to keep the debate going, and we can keep discussing over lunch. Again, for me, it's a very simple, maybe crass analogy, but Europe should not be focusing on only enhancing the old fossil fuel industry and pushing people back there because we have a few companies that are still big that were started in Europe. We should be looking at all the alternatives, at clean energy, at competition, at alternative sources, different ways of doing things. And to me, it's very similar. And I think it's an important point to make, and I'm not completely comparing them equally. It's just, it's a choice, and it's a policy choice in a current environment. If you're out in the metro here today, you'll see that we've also launched a simplification campaign. You have ads everywhere. It's about unlocking innovation. And this fits into a much wider point of Europe seizing the moment that we all know we need to seize, but can we? So again, thank you for being here. Enjoy the lunch. Talk to people you don't agree with. Come talk to us. Again, thank you to the team. Thank you for coming. Thank you to the speakers. Have a wonderful day, and I hope we don't have to do too many of these again on the DNA, and that we can focus on targeted, positive ones where change is needed, and then we will be there pushing positive, ambitious, bold change that helps everyone, and that's how we all win. Thank you very much.